where we did modules 1 through to 4. And just to reiterate something that we said this morning was the aim behind this was it was delivered primarily by Microsoft to integration companies that do partnering managed services for Teams rooms with businesses. And what they thought they would like to do is, a lot of companies would get benefit from this information as well. So they've come to DDLS and asked us to run that because the audience is much larger. And so we ran part 1 yesterday. Some of you hopefully were there. So we pick up with module 5 today. And it starts with the out-of-box experience. Just going to turn that transcript off. That's a little bit better. And so yesterday, what we looked at is networking issues, things that we need in advance, like it needs to be wired access. You can't use Wi-Fi access, assigning the appropriate license, creating the resource account and password, and setting some of the options for the mailbox like auto accept. So what we're going through now is we've got that, it's all written down or it's in our head, and we're about to go through the out-of-box experience on the Teams Room console for the very first time. Now, when I say console, we mainly focus on the Windows experience here because it's consistent across all manufacturers. The Android experience is different per manufacturer. So it could be a little bit like you'd be using the remote control. And like when you've ever logged into Netflix or something like that, you've got to use the TV remote control to put your name and password in there. So it might be a little bit fiddly to set up for the first time. With Windows devices, you can plug a keyboard and a mouse in there, and maybe go through that process a little bit faster. So we mainly focus on Teams Rooms on Windows because it's consistent. It would be just too hard to go through the different scenarios for the Android solution. So this is the out-of-box experience. Once we've gone through that, some post things to do subsequently, and then we want to test that all the settings that we've put through in the console is working, so we can actually test, creating a meeting and testing voice activation and those types of things. So this would be your first run through. So we've got some nice screenshots sort of to show you. So be aware of Windows, keyboard and mouse, which you could take away. You don't have to leave that in the room. It's probably best that it's not left in the room. It just causes confusion for people and more cabling to concern yourself with. But yeah, with Android, you can use the remote, unless you've got touch screen capabilities, which would require HDMI connection to the monitor and also a subsequent USB connection if you have support for that. You often get, during the process, just give you a general feel for, like, say, Android. In the case of, say, Logitech, you'll get a URL that you might go to register the device, and it might display to you a code that you've got to put in. The idea behind that is it's either associating the console with the device, but also it can add it to the Teams admin console. So that's an important concept that we'll talk about in the subsequent modules, is you don't have to join the device to Active Directory on premises or Azure Active Directory. You can do devices and manage them through the Teams admin console. So that process gets them there, and you can do a vast majority of your settings from there. But we'll also talk about, well, maybe companies do want to have them as registered devices and use Intune or Config Manager or Group Policy. So that's the latter part of module 6 and 7, and perhaps some cautionary statements on that, because the devices themselves aren't like normal computers, so you've got to be very careful about defaults. Same with the resource account we discussed yesterday, multi-factor authentication, password changes every 90 days. You don't want that on the account that we use for configuring the devices. So yeah, this is primarily focusing on the Windows ones. Some of them are really simple with the Android ones. With Neat, you pretty much just choose whether you're using Zoom or Teams at the interface, and it says, right, I put the name and password in, and then bang, off you go. Of course, there might be some settings you want to change later than that. And it depends on the state that it arrives in. You might have to do a reset. Sometimes you might have to pair, if you like, the remote with the device. So if you've sort of moved one from one location to another, and somebody's already set it up for something different, can be a little bit fiddly. Generally, it's holding down some buttons as you power it up, and maybe wait 15 seconds before you release it, and it'll ignore its last setting. So they're all slightly different, but this one's mainly focusing on the Windows because it's consistent. So you can create a custom auto unattend XML. So whenever you see XML file in the material from here, we're talking Teams rooms for Windows, because while we can do some administrative settings for Android devices, XML is for Windows environments. So you could, if you wanted to, sort of not have to go through this process doing the Windows install, and skips most of the questions that come up in here. And guides you through it if you like. But again, a bit different depending on the manufacturer when it comes to Android. So you choose your region, and this is just screenshots from the US. Now, normally after this screen, this is the keyboard layout. After this screen, you might find that you get asked if you want to install a second keyboard layout. Probably in most cases with us, you can ignore that step, or you choose no. But yeah, some people might want to put a different language keyboard in there as well. We do run some courses where the material comes from the UK, and they've got a slightly trickier keyboard with some of the, like the pound sign and the caret symbol, and some of those things are the tilde, and they're in slightly different locations. Now, the whole experience here, it can take, you might find it's like 20 or so minutes, maybe a little bit more. The device might go through a couple of reboots once or twice. It's checking for Ethernet and a few of those types of peripherals. And then this will come up where, of course, you have to tick that box and accept the agreement. We all do that. Now, you can sort of exit out of here if you want to bypass some of this stuff. So if you want to quickly go to perhaps running an unattended auto exec XML file or something, run scripts, etc., logged on as the administrator, by bombing out of here with exit, you can sort of jump into those screens a bit quicker. But if you're going through a manual process, you go through here. This is where you enter your resource account, which we talked about yesterday, and provide the password. Now, in the mode, which is on the next, perhaps what I should say, modern authentication should be enabled. Don't want to get too technical on it, but it's not multi-factor authentication. It's basically OAuth 2 and ADL, which is a language for authentication for Active Directory. I have a feeling, if not now, very, very soon, if your company isn't set up for modern authentication, you'll have grief with not only Teams, but with other types of cloud services. So I'd be really surprised, but some businesses have sort of disabled it, but you're going to need to have it. It is the default. And then with the mode, if you're running in hybrid, in other words, you've still got Skype for Business or Skype for Visits and Teams, even if you just Skype for Business on premises, it would be my advice that you still choose Skype for Business and Teams, because adding Teams into the mix, into the mode, will ensure that it registers itself in the Teams admin console. All right, which you want to do. You might see some strange things if it's configured for Skype for Business only, but you'll still see a lot of the main administrative functions in there that you want. I don't know if anybody's in that boat, but yeah, if some companies still want to use like SIP URIs for legacy phones, for want of another phrase, or they're just still in the early stages of migrating things across, all still supported. Now, I suppose this is really, if you've got Skype for Business. If you don't have Skype for Business, you can skip these screens, but this is where you're configuring the domain and the fully qualified distinguished name and the logon for link discovery and some of those options. There's also certificates that need to be involved for Skype for Business on premises. And there we are. And then you might find it might take another 10 or so minutes between reboots at the next screen. That's where we'll look at some built-in accounts. That's where there's a Skype user, which is the default. There's also an administrator account. There's also an admin account, and the admin account is the one that we mainly deal with. But some of these defaults, particularly on the first time you load up, it's using this Skype account for auto sign-ins, and some scripts might be running in the background, locking down the environment, configuring the environment. Now on this screen, it is an older user interface. Some things have changed, but you might find a lot of the Teams Room devices that are shipped today might come with an older UI on it. So just be aware of it. But here you're still at the waiting phase, and then all the icons become available. Now Cortana is now moved to the bottom left. So that is the old interface there. and it'll be replaced with the share button. Now the dial pad or the call button, if that's missing, it simply means that the resource account hasn't been enabled for calling. So we chatted a little bit about that yesterday. If you want to dial, type in somebody's number and dial out, so you just get the audio, or somebody can dial the phone number allocated to the Teams room to connect to the room and then hear the audio from that regard. This is not calling bridges and stuff along those lines, and audio conferencing, that's different. But yeah, if you want it voice enabled. So if you haven't configured it for that, because you don't need it for argument's sake, you won't see that dial pad there. So that's the very minimum to get it started. All we've really done is chose a keyboard layout, a region, and put in the resource account name and password. So we now go through host out-of-box experience settings. So we want to change the default administrator password. We may want to update the Teams app and then update Windows and optionally join Azure Active Directory or AD. And we'll go through that process, but we'll talk about the pluses and minuses. And there's all I want to say is if you are going to join it to Active Directory on premises or Azure Active Directory, you've got to be really careful of defaults. Active Directory on premises, you've got group policy settings. You don't want to lump these resource accounts or these devices into the mix with your standard computer objects. Likewise with Active Directory, you might have conditional access policies. Now we're going to look at some of those things that might be a recommendation. So if you do want to join it to Azure AD, here's some recommended conditional access and maybe some stuff you can do with Intune, but you just got to be absolutely careful of defaults that you're applying to everybody else, because these are different animals from that regard. Just another thing to point out on here, don't ever manually update Windows before you've updated the Teams Room app. The Teams Room app will determine what Windows update is compatible, just because Microsoft, and that goes for Android as well, if they've rolled out an update to an operating system, doesn't mean it's been certified yet for Teams Room devices. So always make sure, if you do feel the need to manually update it, to the Teams Room app first. Okay, so we'll go through how to do that if you need to do it. And to be quite honest, if you leave your Teams Rooms devices for 2 to 3 days, they'll automatically update. So every night at about 2 o'clock, they go looking for updates, and they delays for about half an hour, and if it's found them, then it does a restart and it applies all the settings and any new updates to the client and the operating system. So if you're not in any major hurry, just set them and leave them and check them in a couple of days' time. If, however, for some reason there's absolutely something you want straight away and you need to update, then we'll go through that process. Okay, but it's really important that you do the Teams Room app first. And we'll go through that next couple of screens. Will take us through that process. So you'll get to this log on screen, the standard screen. Again, Cortana won't be there. You click the more button or the ellipses if you like, the more options. And then from there, you can choose settings. Now, from a security perspective, we chatted yesterday about bypassing web proxies. And a lot of businesses go like, oh, anything going to the internet, we don't want to bypass web proxies. Well, they tend to convert UDP to TCP. That's an issue. We went through the advantages of UDP over TCP yesterday. It also creates a bottleneck and just slows things down. And I mentioned yesterday that these devices run Windows IoT, Windows Enterprise 10 IoT, and they run in like a kiosk mode. And it just simply means that the only one app can run on this box. There's no keyboard, Control-Alt-Deletes can work, and those types of things. They're all, it's all very much protected. So a browser can't launch. We will go through some things that we might want to use. So if you do want to enroll it in Intune and stuff, we'll go through some conditional access and some compliance settings that you might want to apply. But to get to this screen, as soon as you click in settings, you're going to get prompted, and this is where it asks you for admin access. Once you can prove that you've got admin access on this device, we'll also look at how we can say this device can only be accessed from the local network. So, if you're worried about a hacker externally getting hold of a name and password, it's not going to allow it to run it from outside of the corporate network. So there's some things that we'll cover a little bit later on. And I just want to mention that because yesterday I made a big chat about, if you can, you really should be encouraged to bypass the web proxy. The device is fairly well locked down, but to get to this stage, you have to prove administration. Now, the default is admin, even though it's got administrator there in that screen, it's actually using the admin account. And all vendors on Windows, the default password is SFB, Skype for Business, SFB in lowercase. So you punch that in, we're going to change that. And then you choose Windows settings. So you have to be an administrator to get that. At the moment, it's sort of running under the Skype user account. We'll change the administrative password in a minute. Again, it's going to make sure that you've got admin rights, SFB, still at this point. And then what we're going to do is go into users, local users and groups, the same as your PC at home. Now you'll see an account called Skype there. You'll also see administrator. So do not touch the Skype account. It's used for restarts and other types of things. So leave it, and the default administrator account in full is disabled, so there's no need to touch that. But it's the admin account that we're going to play around with. So you double click on that and you change the password. You can see there's some PowerShell there. Talk a little bit more about PowerShell later on, and you give that complex password at that point. If you don't want to wait 2 or 3 days and have it automatically fix itself or update itself to the latest Teams Room app and the Windows updates, you can. Now I will give you the URL. Might be just as easy if I type it. I think actually MTR. Yep, I think I've typed that correctly. And in there, there's an option on that document to do a manual updated device, and it has step 1, step 2 with other links. So yeah, at that point in time, you can download the latest version of the Teams Room app. Now, what you will need to do, it's an Edge thing. You'll have to go to that file, go into its properties, and choose the unblock option at that point. And it's just how downloads from Edge work before you're able to run that. And then you can run the script. So we're in the admin mode in the command prompt, and that's the path that you would type in there to where the download has, and then do a reboot after that. And that'll update that. Now, what you might want to do, the Teams Room app will block updating a non-certified operating system update. And that's the default if you let it do its own thing. But if you're going to start mucking around with it, you might find that see how it's got pause updates in there. So there is a block in place for doing it, but if it's possible, what you certainly want to do is pause the Windows updates while you're manually updating the Teams Room app. And so while you're doing those things, that 2 or 3 day default where it protects itself, might for some reason fluke an update in the background of Windows while you're still mucking around doing a manual update of the Teams app. So it's always recommended that you pause the updates. And that document link that I've given to you there is will walk you through that process. And it's quite true though. A lot of the devices arrive with an older version of it, and you want to update it, but it's my preference unless there's something urgent to just let it do itself and set it and forget it. It's quite good from that regard. Now, if you wanted to, you can join it to Active Directory on premises. We'll talk more about that in the next module. You'll be really careful about group policies and domain OUs. Break inheritance, maybe create an OU for these devices, move them in there, break any parent group policies. Be really careful with those types of things, but that's the process. That's the same for any PC. If you want to use command line to join, if you want to just join it to Azure Active Directory, which is probably my preference, but that's me speaking. I'm not speaking on behalf of DDLS or Microsoft for that matter. But again, I've still got to be careful because Azure AD's got conditional access. You've probably got a conditional access that says all users must use MFA, something along those lines. You might have an exemption that multi-factor authentication is a must if you're logging on from an external network. It's not so bad, but you just got to be careful when you make changes at one point that you don't forget the resource account. You don't forget the computer or the device for the Teams Room. You don't want normal defaults to apply to that in all cases. In fact, some of the settings in Intune aren't supported on Teams Room devices. We'll go through that, and I'll give you a link to a document that covers that in good detail if you're ever in any doubt. So you don't have to, but we'll come through in the next module. We'll go through, well, you can have them unmanaged. So you're not using Azure Active Directory or Active Directory group policy or config manager in Intune, or a bit of a hybrid, or so we'll go through those different options and the cautions there as well. But if it is Skype for Business on premises, then you're gonna have to join it. So joining Azure Active Directory, you can you can do it on your own PCs. You just hit the Windows key and you type access. You'll get access, work or school, and it's just a dialog box that you walk through there, which you provide an account, and it'll find its DNS records for registering it in Intune as well as Azure Active Directory. And there's also PowerShell commands if you want to do it. Configuring, so we're still after out-of-box experience stuff here. So all we've done so far is fired it up, changed the default administrator name and password, told it that it's in Teams Room only, or sorry, Teams mode only, or Skype with Teams mode. So this is still some, and what we've done is we've updated the Teams Room app and the Windows operating system potentially, and we just want to make sure that that's now has worked after the reboot. So we're going into more and settings. At this point, they'll be asking you for the admin name and password, which you've changed, so it's not Skype for Business anymore. And then on the About screen, you should see the version of Windows and the app version there, so that'll tell you that it was successful. Now, yesterday we mentioned the first time you configure your devices, you have to have DHCP enabled. You can change a Teams Room device to a static IP address post going through the out-of-box experience the first time, which you can do under advanced there if you need to. And that might be useful. I'll probably encourage dynamic device groups. I'll mention it now because it comes up a little bit later on. You can use a number of properties. So it could be a part of the name, like you can use them for users too. So if department is equal to sales, you can do model is for device, you can go model, serial number, manufacturer. There's a few things you can go through that process. So if you name your Teams Rooms devices all the same with a prefix, you can say anything with this prefix automatically becomes a member of this dynamic device group. So you don't have to manually put them in and out of groups. For the most part, that's really cool for exemptions or for applying. I just want this policy to explicitly apply to them, or I want this to apply to everything, excluding my Teams Room devices or even my resource accounts. There are a couple of things that we'll cover today where dynamic device groups aren't supported, but they're few and far between. So it's a good one there from that. So the only reason I mention that is you might not concern yourself too much with static IP addresses. There's some minor advantages to it, I suppose. So now we're going into some other settings here in the meetings option, and there's a little bit more coming up on the next slide as well, but we've got automatic screen sharing. So if somebody with an HDMI cable on a laptop plugs directly into the console for the Teams Room, it's going to automatically bring that into the meeting. Now it does disable cameras and microphones so you don't get feedback, but it pretty much starts to display straight away, and you might want that option. Show meeting names. When somebody creates an invite to a meeting in a calendar appointment, there is an option to say it's a private meeting, which at that point people don't see the subject of the meeting. It just might be of a sensitive nature, somebody's being spoken to, or there's redundancy talks or something along those lines, and you wouldn't want that information to get out. But if maybe there's a device that's in a certain location where it is a sensitive room, maybe it's the executive boardroom, and as a default we'll just say hide the meeting names. We'll turn that off, so you'll really see the host of the meeting and a date and time. That's it. A bit of a strange one, but yeah, maybe there's it always hosts sensitive meetings. And we chatted yesterday where you might have a Teams Room device in the corner of an executive's office where they sit down and they might have a few meetings, and you've got the thing sitting there, the console there with the meetings coming up in the afternoon, and because it's in the executive's office, there just might be some information in there that you just don't want all and sundry to see. The other one's leave meetings automatically if everybody else has left. Now, a couple of things have to apply with this. All remote participants, so I'm not talking about people in the room, all remote participants have to have left the meeting, and the end time for the meeting has passed. So if the time of the meeting has passed and all external people have gone, it'll automatically end the meeting, which is good from a, somebody might want to connect into it and it's coming up as busy and in use just for shutting those services down. But yeah, if somebody's still remotely connected to it, it'll stay there. So it's just a nice setting to automatically turn it off. Third-party meetings. So if you want to enable it, there'll be a few more there in the near future. I think there's also WebEx, Zoom, and trying to remember the other ones that'll appear in there. Blue Jeans you might see appearing there soon. So you can opt in and out of whether you want all of them. Now, what happens with third-party meetings, it actually uses like a web protocol. If anybody's interested, GoTo is the other one that might appear soon. Now, there's a couple of things we've got to chat about on that. If you enable it, sometimes companies have Defender for Office 365. So Defender is a bit of a tough one because everything's called Defender, but there's Defender for endpoint, there's Defender for identity, there's Defender for cloud apps, there's Defender on the workstations, there's Defender for Office 365. It does a lot of stuff, but one of the options you get with it is safe links. So you can create a policy where if people click on URLs, what Microsoft do is they visit it on a sandboxed operating system. They actually go to that site, and then if there's a problem with it, then they'll block or they'll seriously recommend that the person does not continue anyway onto that site. So it's there for your own protection. Now you can do some things like allow it through. You can also say anything for these URLs is fine, bypass that policy. All I'm getting at there is it changes the URL. So when people are using these third-party meetings, it's using this web protocol, and it also has a URL. So when people click on it, that actually gets changed by Exchange technically in the background to go into this safe links option. So that can break the meeting. So you got to make sure if you've got Defender for Office 365 and web links on, safe links I should say, make sure that you're excluding the Teams room stuff. Yes, that is my phone, my apologies. So I didn't think now I've turned the microphone up, you're hearing that, so I know it is. The group of my friends are driving me bonkers, so I'll if it happens again I will press the button and say go away. So yeah, you can do that in there. Also, some stuff will come up a little bit later on. Join with custom information, because that can be important. If you use this on a regular basis and you might be talking to other clients, they'll just see like room 1, and you might say, well, the custom information, I'll put DDLS room 1. So people waiting in the lobby or something like, there's no confusion that it's, oh, okay, it's DDLS's room 1, not our room 1. So that's the option there. Thought I might as well talk about that while we have that screen up. So there it is there. Join with the custom information, and you can play around with that if you need to. There's also a clearer ID rather than using the resource account in the background there. Bluetooth beaconing, got a couple of options there, and I've got some nice demos to show you. Module 8, it's got some animated videos that we'll play. Well, working from top to bottom, dual monitor, if you've got multiple screens, you can turn that on, and there's also an option there to swap screens. So for some reason the people are coming up on one and the content's on the other one, you want to swap that around, you can do that. And there's a feature coming up called front row, and front row doesn't like you swapping screens. It automatically detects where the speaker and where the content goes. So it's a bit hard for me to explain, show you that without some stuff coming up in module 8. But I just want to warn you about that. Certainly encourage people to have dual monitors. By the way, you need a pro license for multiple monitors. But swapping them, the other thing with front row that we'll talk about a little bit later on, which is a very cool feature, go back to 100% scaling. It can get really funky if you play around. Now, a lot of people, when they plug into TVs and those types of monitors, they change things to like 150 and yeah, that'll screw with things because it's all designed to dynamically work things out for you using front row view and intelligent cameras. So just be aware of that. Dual monitor, very good. Swapping screen, great. But if you are going to play around with front row, which we'll talk about in module 8, keep that one in the back of your mind. Scaling of your monitor and swapping screens is not recommended for that front row view. That will make a little bit more sense later on. Now, there's also the option down, send logs in a feedback. So whoever's email address you put in there, they'll get notified if somebody's, provided any feedback at the end of the meeting. I've got a sample to show you, just a text format. Bluetooth beaconing. I've also got an animated slide out later on, so I can be in a meeting and I can say, can you find me a room? And if that room's not in use and I'm within proximity of it, it'll suggest the rooms and I can say, yes, thanks very much, walk into that, and it's just instantly join the meeting. I don't have to invite it manually. It doesn't have to be added to the list of invitees. It'll just find that for me. What's important about that is the Bluetooth chip, if you like, is in the compute. So in a Windows scenario, if you've got a compute and then the camera, the monitors, the speaker, Android, typically all in one device. But some companies put the compute in in the server room, in a rack mount, and then they just run cables into the classroom with extenders in it. So it might be in the room next door. Might sound like a good idea, but that can impact some of those things. The other one is remote control. You get things like changing the layout of the video, hands up, volume, mute. So a couple of common commands, which is very, very cool because it means that, I don't have to sit in front of the console. I can control the meeting from wherever I'm sitting, which might be really convenient in some cases. It doesn't offer everything, and you have to be an invitee of the meeting. You can't have somebody outside the meeting room playing around with the controls just to be funny. If somebody does put in a poor audio report, you'll get, that's the feedback log and some generic comments from the person. So that's whoever you put in that field down the bottom. Oh, sorry, yeah, on that previous screen. Coordinated meetings. So this will work with other Teams rooms, as well as if you've got Surface hubs. The idea behind this is that when I launch the meeting on this Teams room device, I'd like either another Teams room device in another part of the company or in a meeting room next door. I want it to instantly join. Now, this is an all the time thing, but it can be another Teams room. Typically where people use it is if they've got a Surface hub. So a Surface hub does many things, but in the case of meetings, it's excellent as a whiteboarding tool, but you can also fire up a browser, you can fire up another app and share that with everybody in the meeting. Now, just on that, you can't launch Whiteboard from the Teams room console. Resource accounts don't have OneDrive, and when you're doing whiteboards, it's using OneDrive in the background. So anybody in the meeting can start Whiteboard and everybody can start drawing on the digital Microsoft Whiteboard, but you can't launch it from the Teams room device. However, if you're lucky enough to have a Surface Hub, well, one of the things it does really well is Whiteboard, and you can join it that way. But you can bring up other apps. But if you have a Surface Hub, what you need to do is invite it to the meeting, and you'd have to walk over to it, fire up the Teams client app, and go join the meeting. And that's just confusing for some people, especially if they're only occasional users of the Teams room. They've got to go, what do I have to do again? I have to contact so-and-so and walk me through it again. It's just not ideal. So what we can do here is basically say coordinated meeting, and then down the bottom of the screen, you can see that's where I would type the name of the Surface Hub. And I'm also saying in this case, the Teams room device, I want its microphone and its camera to be the default. In other words, I want the camera and the microphone turned off on the Surface Hub because they come with cameras and microphones and speakers. We don't want feedback. You generally always want this, the cameras and speakers, the microphones that come with your Teams rooms, probably superior to the camera and the microphone in the Surface Hub. And you might also have multiple microphones placed around the room as well. What you would do, which we don't sort of show in this screen, is you then go to the properties on the Surface Hub and you do the reverse. So you would say, I trust this Teams room device. So you have to nominate. It can't just be any nearby Teams room device or Surface Hub. You have to nominate it. And then you could turn off the camera and the microphone when it's joining the meeting. But it can be another team room. Maybe you got a room next door and you just bang, you just want it to start, but it's all the time. It's a global setting. It's not an occasional. Just on the device itself, if you've got multiple speakers, multiple microphones, multiple cameras, you can just nominate what's the default one. Generally, the camera's the one in the front of the room. Microphones, if you've got an intelligent microphone that will handle Cortana commands and voice recognition, you would want that to be the default. It can also have an impact on people plugging in an HDMI device. So if that HDMI device, so if somebody plugs a laptop into it, the speaker that you choose as a default, any sound they're playing on their laptop will come out of that one. So sometimes that can be a little bit of a challenge there. You can have up to 3 cameras on Windows versions of Teams Room, and this is where you can select it. Also on the right, there's content cameras. Now, I've got a nice video on content cameras. If you were with me yesterday, you would have seen that turns an analog whiteboard into a digital whiteboard. So I can walk in front of it and I become a ghost. You can see through me. People walk in front of the whiteboard, they can still see the text. It also skews, not the right word, the keystones are automatically fixed depending on how extreme the camera angle is. So that's very, very good. So you would choose the content camera from that drop-down box. Now, it has to be a camera that supports content camera. You can't just have another camera that you bought and shoved in front of the whiteboard. It just won't even offer it in that drop-down box. In fact, I don't even think it lets you save and exit that screen if you try to pick a camera that's not supported for it. You'll also notice there that if it's cameras for some reason upside down, you can rotate it 180 degrees if that's going to help if it's mounted upside down. Now, themes, from the out-of-box experience or in the settings, you might not find you get as many themes as you can choose. You can do a custom background if you want to. I'll show you how to do that a little bit later on. There's some links and some stuff you can get your hands on if you really want to customize it. But I'm led to believe by Microsoft there's possibly very soon going to be a few changes from this screen, so you might be able to upload a logo and choose a few, from a color palette a little bit. So that might suit a lot of businesses without having to go through, because the only way I'm aware of doing it is through XML files and stuff, and then loading the XML file and the bitmap JPEG or whatever you're using onto the devices itself. So it's a bit of a fiddly process, but some companies want company branding there, but I believe it's about to increase a little bit. So testing, we've gone all through those settings. Now we just want to make sure that it's working, like the default camera and the microphone, etc. So we'll click Meet, and this is what we're sort of trying to do here, is we're going to join the meeting and just make sure that the default camera, the default microphone, the default speakers all kick in. That's if you're lucky enough to have multiple cameras and speakers, etc. So from here, invite somebody up the top. So we'll type in Megan's name. You can also lock meeting from the ellipses. So Megan Brown, all the standard default users. And then, it's probably you're testing it. You got your Teams client running somewhere, send a request to join, and then that person can go accept, and bingo, you can see them in the meeting. So, oh, that's working. It's finding the global address list from Teams, and people were able to connect to it. And you'd be testing all your modalities, your audio, your camera and stuff along those lines, make sure that's all working. Dialing out, if you've configured the resource account to have a phone number and it's got a calling plan. Chatted a little bit about that yesterday. Direct routing is where companies are keeping their existing session border controllers and their PBX, and you might be happy with that. Now you've still got to configure some DNS records and some certificates. So Microsoft will relay calls to your session border controller. Other businesses are opting out of that, and they go to a calling plan or operator connect. It's roughly the same. Simply means that the session border controller is either hosted at Microsoft or your telco, and they'll hook you onto the public switch telephone network. And I think last I checked, Telstra about $18 per user per month for unlimited domestic landline and mobile calls. But you've got Orange and NTT, there's a whole range of people. Operator Connect, and if you go to Microsoft Calling Plan, they'll probably suggest you go to Telstra and not picking one over the other. Operator Connect may offer a few more, and what that means is they host the session border controller on their premises for you. They still, integrate with Microsoft. It's still a cost involved. You can port existing phone numbers, or you can start getting new phone numbers, whatever you want to do in that. So if you get a phone number for the Teams room, you allocate it to the resource account in the Teams admin center. No good typing it in Exchange or in the properties of the resource account. It will do nothing. It's purely just information. So here we're testing it. So we'd want to see that logo. So you press call. It's pretty straightforward here. Dial the number. Again, this would be probably your mobile phone that you were trying. Ring, and then you would answer it, and you can see, bang, you're now in there as well. You might also want to type, call and then type a user's name, and that's just sort of making sure, especially if you've got, a hybrid with Skype for Business and SIP URI, you might want to make sure you've got a SIP gateway running that's going to work to your SIP style phones if you're keeping existing stuff. And dialing in, grab your mobile phone, dial the number that you've allocated to the Teams room, and just make sure you pick that up from the room. Make sure all the speakers are working, the default speakers are coming through. HDMI sharing as well. So grab a laptop and an HDMI cable, plug it in. It should automatically come up, but if automatic screen enabling isn't enabled, you can go into more and then choose present. What you'll probably start seeing on the front console now is the share button. From that regards, it's probably easier. But it should automatically go. The display on the laptop should go through to whatever you've chosen as your default display, and then you can press stop sharing when you're done, or disconnect the cable. It should automatically stop sharing. So make sure audio and video are being heard and seen in the room. And then scheduling a meeting. So I'd go into the Teams client, create a meeting, and now if you've created locations, you can type that or choose that from there. Yesterday we looked at places for Outlook and locations in Teams calendaring. If you haven't done that yet, for argument's sake, you can just add the resource account to the attendees up the top. If you've created locations, when you choose the location, it automatically adds the resource account as an invitee to the meeting. And then what you should see, this might take 2 minutes, normally a bit quicker than that, but it might take 2 minutes. You'll now see your scheduled meeting sitting on the console in the Teams room, and there's also a Teams logo in the we got the little Teams logo there. It's if you've got WebEx or Zoom, you'll get the logo for them sitting up there, which is just a nice way of testing it if you wanted to try that too. And bang, just press the button on the console and the meeting should be joined. Cortana. Now, for this to work, well, actually, let me rephrase that. If you've got an intelligent speaker, so there are microphone and speaker like EPOS, and there's other brands that have it, then the wake word "Hey Cortana" is supported. So you can actually sit there and say, "Hey Cortana, start the testing meeting," or "Hey Cortana, call Megan," and it'll do those common commands for if you want. If you don't have an intelligent speaker / microphone for that support, you can press the Cortana button and you might find that the microphone you do have supports some commands. But if you really like that, you like that feature, then make sure that you get one that's capable of doing it. So yeah, "Hey Cortana, call Megan Brown." "Hey Cortana, start sales meeting." They're the sort of common ones there. So Logitech's got them. Lenovo, Yealink have an M Speech or a Rockfall. EPOS, I think they were the first ones, I think, with intelligent speakers. Jabra have got a really cool, the Panacast 50s, a few other ones. Some of the soundbars, the Bose soundbar supports it too. Sennheiser's got their Troc one. So that's just an example. Try saying call, so that'll prompt you as well. And you can say okay or yes, and that'll make that call. Other things to validate, a little bit more coming up on each, and some of these we've probably covered them before. So yesterday we talked about naming when you create the resource account, giving it an additional name or a display name, just so when people are picking it in their calendars, it makes a bit more sense than some prefix resource account thing that you've done, like MTR whatever. So make sure that that's displays, particularly if people in Outlook or in the Teams calendar. and the Windows computer name. So if it's a Windows Teams room, and that's perhaps what we're focusing on a little bit here, that the compute also, you're happy with that name. And we've changed the administrator password, and we've done the manual updates of the operating system and the Teams client. And you might want to update firmware to your cameras, your microphones, etc. With Windows devices, the updates and firmware normally come with the Windows updates. There might be some exceptions to that, but for the most part with Windows devices, you'll just get that when that updates, and that could be a reason why you wanted to hurry along an update rather than wait a couple of days for it to do it itself. Android's a little bit different. You might have to go to, now you can, by the way, you can get the drivers and firmware and put them on a USB stick, and you can walk them to the device and go into admin mode and run them, copy them and run them from there. You just got to be absolutely careful that you're getting the right ones for the Teams room. I'd be contacting your OEM manufacturer if you're having problems with firmware on those all-in-one style devices. But yeah, it's possible to do that. And the console, make sure that it's secure and not pinched. That's the hub there, where they have the compute and the console in the one. Plugging in HDMI, and is that all functional? Is the console swiveling freely? Generally speaking, what I do is just make sure the cables are well and truly out of everybody's way. You don't want people to knock them. You don't want tinkerers to actually go near them if you can help it. But maybe during the testing phases, yeah, I've seen it. I've seen some strange scenarios with that, but be careful that. Yeah, updates to Android's coming up a little bit later on. You do that via the Teams admin center, but generally with the Windows ones, you can, maybe after the initial manual update, you can set them and forget them. So that's basically the summary for this module, which was module 5. Let's have a look at module 6, and then we'll have a break. Sort of break up this into 2 parts. So you might see like part 1 and part 2. Right. So what we're looking at here, module 6, is management options. So we're in the Teams admin center, and there's 2 options in there: Teams room for Windows, Teams rooms for Android. It used to be collaboration bars, and we'll look at the options that we can do in there. And then later on, we'll look at, well, what if we want to use scripts or PowerShell commands and even Microsoft Graph? So we'll look at the different alternatives for managing the devices and in monitoring, making sure everything's running okay. The next module, module 7, will go through pretty much the operating system, updating the Windows, managing the operating systems for Android as well as for Windows. This is mainly the settings that we might want to apply for our Teams rooms. So it is covered in 2 different modules. We'll break that up, have a tea break in between. So there's a couple of options with your Teams rooms, unmanaged, and that sounds a little bit strange, but it just means, well, I'm not going to enroll it in Intune. I'm not going to enroll it in Azure Active Directory or Active Directory on premises. And they'll, in the case of Windows, they'll automatically update. You can do a lot of the settings from the Teams admin console. The Android ones will list when an update for the OS is available for them, and you can just schedule them to run then if you want to accept the defaults, and they'll sort of run an update for you in the background. You can also do a lot of settings from in there, but other options you could do is create XML files for the Windows devices, and you could manually walk them to them if you wanted to. You can use PowerShell. So there are a couple of other options, and all we're saying here is, well, if you don't want to make them as registered devices in your Azure Active Directory or Active Directory on premises because you're concerned about them getting group policy settings or conditional access settings or compliance settings that you've got on Intune, well, maybe you can still do it this way, no problem at all. And as I said, for the most part, once you've set them up, they'll do the updates, they'll handle the updates themselves, and you'll just go to the admin center, Teams admin center, and they'll give you a clear indication if the device is fine and if the peripherals are playing up. And we'll also look at managed services a bit later on with the Pro license, and that gives you a hell of a lot more information and insights into the device if you need that. However, some businesses do want, don't want them to have them as unmanaged, for want of another phrase. So yeah, now we're using Active Directory. So that's an AD on-prem. And maybe you've got Exchange on and Skype for Business on premises. Now you can use configuration managers. Quite a few slides come out in config management, endpoint management, Intune. It's a bit confusing for people, so I'll wait till we get there and break it down. I don't want to say essentially the same thing, because that's not true, but the level of control is very similar from that regard. Config manager, which is part of System Center, is assuming that they are domain joined devices. Intune, you can do stuff that's not necessarily not joined to domain joined. It can be bring your own devices, have your own devices, mobile phones, more operating systems. But yeah, you can do that. The XML file, so from Windows, I can create an XML file, get it to it. I could probably use group policy, or I could manually walk it to the devices. PowerShell to remotely control the devices, or all those types of things if you want to. But we want, like every other device, we want it to be enrolled in Active Directory on premises. So that's also an option. We've got hybrid, so it's a bit of both. So it's in Azure AD as well as Active Directory on premises. So we've still got the Teams admin center. We can use Exchange on-prem or online. PowerShell commands for working with that. Intune. Active Directory Sync, Azure Active Directory Sync, is a tool that companies use to link their AD on-premises objects to their matching account in Active Directory in the cloud. So you can have devices automatically and users automatically sync. They are different accounts that often worries people in a copy of accounts. They are a new account, but they are linked by some common fields. Still use PowerShell. So these are all tools that you could use if you're running them in a hybrid scenario. Probably my sort of preference is to use Microsoft 365. So yeah, they're going to be objects in Azure Active Directory. I'm just not going to have that in AD on-prem. So it's not getting group policy settings. Okay. Talk about, well, what does group policy bring to the table as far as Teams room devices is. We're using Exchange Online. We don't have Exchange on-prem needs anymore. Endpoint Manager. So effectively, I've got access to Intune. Config Manager, as I said before, is part of System Center. System Center is a suite of products, one of them being Config Manager. And you can do things like hardware and software inventory, software and operating system updates. You can also do compliance settings and monitor devices to see from a performance point of view. It's a very brief overview of it. Very good product, very popular with large organizations that have tons of PCs to look after. But Intune came along for mobile device management, and you can also do mobile application management, which I won't go into any detail on, but Intune can talk to have your own devices, so home devices, mobile phones, so a greater array of operating systems, so Macs and Androids, iOS phones, etc. And the device doesn't have to be an organizational allocated device. So it doesn't have to be a member of Active Directory on premises, whereas Config Manager, no, the box has to be domain joined and has to regularly rejoin the domain. So Intune goes, well, any device. In fact, I could control what you can get access to if you jumped onto an internet cafe PC with Intune. Now, a lot of businesses that invested heavily in Config Manager might like what they see with Intune, and they may say, well, what we'll do is we'll get Intune to control some settings and Config Manager will do the other ones, or maybe some businesses might say, well, moving forward, all our new workstations and our personal devices for our users will control with Intune, and all our domain joined devices will control with Config. But you just got the option there. So they often refer to that as co-management. There's actually a wizard that you can run through in Config Manager to say, hey, I'm transferring some of the jobs that I do to Intune. But in this case, I'm not using Config Manager. These devices aren't joined to Active Directory on premises. I'm still getting all the benefits of using Intune. Now, when they say Endpoint Manager, Microsoft sort of renamed Intune Admin Center to Endpoint Manager because it can also give settings for people that are in that co-management scenario I was talking about. So they might see some settings in there for Config Manager, as well as if you're just using Intune, you just use the Intune settings, but Endpoint Manager is your console. So you might see Intune, you might see Endpoint Manager. Don't let that stress you too much. Either way, you're using Endpoint Manager, your admin center, you're just using the Intune functionality. And good old PowerShell. I'm going to see some examples, but there is a Skype XML file you can customize and get it to the devices, and then the next time it restarts and accept all those settings. So you can, all the things you did with the unmanaged PCs are still supported in that case. So using the Teams Admin Center, some of you might have already seen that. You'll notice you've got Teams Room on Windows, Teams Rooms on Android. It's a bit of a tongue twister that. In the past, you might have seen collaboration bars. That's what they call the all-in-one devices. They now call it Teams Room on Android, and also you can see Surface Hub. And as you drill into each of it, you'll see, I'll give you a little bit of a screenshot on each of the features coming up. So there we have a list. They would be Windows ones there. So notice the username that they've got there, MTR, at the start of everything. So that's helpful from that regard. And it's basically saying it's Logitech and it's currently available. And I've got the model information there. But I can drill into each of them. So if I click on Conference Room 1, you start seeing a little tile for each of the peripherals there. So I can see the speaker, the microphone, etc. They're all connected and all running fine. And you've also got the capability to walk away. You'll see a little bit further down, you get 7-day quality. So he's red. We've had an issue at that point in time. Mostly this over the last 7 days, the device has been running well. We can download logs should we need to it. Current usage, it's idle at this stage. So a lot of information from there. If we start drilling into it a bit more with device information, we can go to activity. So there's dates and times, numbers of participant. We can see there's that poor one there. If we will go into the history, you can see when it was last updated, restarted from that regard. And connectivity issues. So you can see it's connected to the network. The sign-in was fine. If it's using Skype for Business, it's all fine there as well. If it's just using Skype for Business on premises, you might see not applicable in some of these cases. And you can do a restart. You can also do a re-sign-in for Android devices. And this is a key difference between Android and Windows. If you make changes to the settings in here, so I can click on Edit Settings and make some parameter changes. Once you make changes in the Teams Admin Center, it creates this configuration XML file in the background and writes it to the device. So it actually sends it to the device. But it won't apply those settings until the device has done a restart. If you went to the console like we were looking at before and made changes, then you just wait and there's no need for you to do a restart. The changes are live, but if you're doing it by the admin center, it pushes it out. Also, if you don't click a restart, it might not be that urgent. That 2 o'clock at night, it's basically about 1 minute past 2, the device goes, righto, I'm now looking for any updates, and it gives itself half an hour for the updates to completely come down. And at that point, it goes on the next restart, it goes, oh, I've got a new config XML file. I'll load those parameters, and then it restarts and then it deletes the XML file. So nobody can ever go and get the XML file. It's actually encrypted, but nobody can ever find one on it. It's gone once it's loaded. But if you want it to happen straight away, you can do a restart if you like. In the case of Androids, you just make changes and you normally wait about 2 or 3 minutes and it just automatically applies. In fact, you might find it's down to about 20 seconds now before it updates any changes that you've made. So there's a couple other things that's handy with the Android ones. If you get a whole heap of new ones, you can do a mass sign in it, etc. as well. Device administrator. So if you're not a Teams administrator or a global administrator, have you got somebody at work that you want to be able to help you with some of these things? So making changes or at least downloading logs too, the device logs. you can make somebody a device administrator. Now you can do it in the Teams, in the Azure Active Directory. You can do it in Microsoft 365 User Admin Console as well if you want to. The only thing with a device administrator is it's all Teams rooms, and larger organizations might say, well, I'm happy for Cal to look after the Teams rooms in Melbourne. I don't want him necessarily to be changing settings on devices in Sydney or Perth, whatever the case may be. So you can, so that's just showing you where you can go and add somebody to the device administrators group, but you can do it in other locations. But you can create what's called administrative units. If you haven't heard of administrative units, effectively it's a name, and in that name you add the Teams rooms, the devices, and you also add the users. So effectively, if I'm a device administrator and I'm in an administrative unit, I can only administer devices in that administrative unit. So I'd create a Melbourne administrative unit. I'd add all the Teams room devices into that, and my user account into that, and that means I can only do device admin functions, but only on devices in that the Melbourne location. I have got potentially some URLs here. Fortunately, you can't copy and paste from some screens. If anybody's interested in that, there's a video walkthrough on creating administrative units. Yeah. So that could be handy. And some of these things might come up in the exam too. So while you might never use it, if you want to go for the digital badge, keep that stuff in the back of your mind. So you add the resource account and the administrator in there, and that isolates them. You can use this for other things too, by the way, not just for Teams rooms. It could be handy. And now when I log back on, I would only see the devices that I've got that are in my administrative unit. That's what that's just trying to show you there. Now that was a lot of that stuff was for Windows devices. How do we treat Android devices? Now, if any of you have looked after phones in Teams Admin Center, it's very similar to that. Now I have updated these slides because what I was given from Microsoft had the old tabs down the bottom, so I apologize for that being chopped off down the bottom. But my main thing was to show you might have had slightly different headings in your PDF to what the screen looks like now. So it's Teams rooms for Androids, but notice they've got touch consoles and then configuration profiles, which is primarily where we're going and doing our settings. So we go, very typical of Teams admin is you've got a policy, if you like, and you go to it and you make changes, and then you say, right, this policy applies to these people, or in our case, these Teams rooms. So what can we do? And here's some settings here. So you can change the language, the time zone, the layout of the times. So you just want, do characters for the date and the month, or you want it full. Whether you want 24-hour clock or a 12-hour clock, and you can say when you want the backlight to kick in if it's idle. Also further down, you've got things such as an administrative password, so somebody can go to that device and provide that password to make changes for some of these settings. There's a few other things in there, like how it receives its IP address, DHCP, or assign a static IP address if you need it. If you've dealt with a phone before, so there's the old tabs along the bottom. It's got phones, and you would be still choosing the Teams room devices in there. It's been updated now. But once you've created your profile settings, you then select the Teams room. So I know that's a user here. And you say, hey, they're getting this configuration profile. And sorry, yeah. There you go, yeah. Sorry, I just thought I'd missed something from there. Now tags are actually assigned more at the user level more than the device. So what I'm getting at there is if you assigned a tag to a resource account that said Logitech, whatever, model number, whatever, and then there's a change at work and the resource account logs into a different device, like a Link, it's going to look wrong to everybody, and you'll be going like, what? So tags are typically designed for you to filter. If you've got lots of devices, you can search on a tag, everything without a tag will appear there, so then you can use it for bulk actions. So it's probably more likely you'd use the location or the department or the area. A lot of people, when they create the tags, they start putting, manufacturer and model numbers in there, and it might work if you don't make many changes, but yeah, it could cause some confusion. 25 characters in maximum. And remote sign out. You can do a remote sign out. You can also do a remote sign in, which is very, very cool. So I think the next screen has a sign in. Yeah. Now, why is this interesting? With Windows, the first time you configure the device, you actually have to be there. You have to be in front of it, and you'll have to manually put in the credentials. I'm sorry, I just noticed Ben's message there. The slide should match, but as I said, there was an earlier one where I put a newer version on my slides, but I think your PDFs, which I got from Microsoft, has got the old, where it's got phones. That should be the only difference, to the best of my knowledge. With Android devices, you can do a bulk upload of MAC addresses into the Teams admin center for Android, so they're already in here. And then what you can do is you can start nominating the device, the account that's going to log into the device, and you can see, you go to this registration screen, you copy and paste this code into it, and then you can do sign in. So I don't have to walk to the devices and sign in with a resource account. You can allocate them from the Teams admin center, which is pretty handy if you've got like a whole heap to do, or you've delegated it to one person and have to physically run around and do that. With Windows you can't, but with Android you can. Now, when it comes to the updates, the operating system, so what happens with Android is because you get them updated by, does Google look after it? So I should know that. But then the vendors, Logitech, Link, and all the rest of them that deal with it, they decide when they get hold of it, and they make sure that it's going to be compatible with their devices. Now, what happens is the OEMs send their updated operating system through to Microsoft, and they basically say it's certified to work with Teams. I'm not sure off the top of my head if Microsoft do a further check. They may well do. Once they're happy with it, so the manufacturer's happy with it, Microsoft happy with it, it'll tell you that there's an update available in here. So generally, my experience has been it's about a version behind. So, for example, if your device is running version 10 and then version 11 is released, it probably might be applied once version 12 is released, and then yours will update to version 11. So generally speaking, it's, my experience has been it's probably a version behind, but that's how it works. So it's Collab OS is the Android OS, and what you can do is leave it to do automatic updates, and you can choose when you prefer it. So on top of the version behind, if that makes sense, you can further defer it if you want to, or you can say as soon as it's available. So if you're on version 10 and version 12 has been released, you'll go to version 11. If you want to, you can say, wouldn't mind sitting back and just waiting a little bit further. Maybe there might be some devices that are mission critical. You just say, I think we might defer that one in case, because it's, we can't afford to not be with that. So you can do that if you need to. If you want to nominate the schedule, and I've got a feeling I should know the default. It's like the second week or something, so many days after it's released. That's something along those lines. But you can go in and say, no, I want to use manual updates, turn the auto up, and you can select the one that you want. So if it's got to be still got to be available in that view, and some, rather than set and forget, you can have it update when you're ready for it. Now, notifications and alerts, I've got to say, it's only in its early days, so there's more coming to this feature. but you can have in the Teams admin center, you can go down to alerts and create a rule. And effectively what you're doing here is adding the users and the devices that you're most concerned about. And there's a subset of information that will tell you. So it'll tell you if there's, it's unable to start, or as the device is suddenly offline. So at least you can just be notified. Now you can get a channel alert, so it's going to send something through to you in Teams, or you can do a webhook. So if you've got it's JSON, it's a JSON payload. So if you've got something like ServiceNow, it can hook into that. And I think the next screen takes you through a sample of the code that you can do here. So you can configure that. But at the moment, it's sort of really just telling you the date and the time, that whether it's online or offline. Generally that it's offline, that's what you want to be notified on. But I'm pretty sure that may expand in the near future. A little bit more to go, everybody. I won't keep you much longer, and we'll have a tea break. I appreciate some of you probably ready for a leg stretch. Microsoft Graph. Now, I do a bit of this in the Teams training. We have a 4-day course on Teams admin if anybody's interested, but a lot of that is not specifically on Teams rooms. In fact, there's only a very brief conversation on it. It's mainly like security and governance, defaults for messaging policies, calling policies, Teams policies. We go through a lot of that type of stuff. And there's a little bit on there on calling and direct routing and calling plans, etc. But in there you can use Microsoft Graph. And there's also Microsoft Graph is a website, but it's also you can add it to PowerShell. There's Microsoft Graph commandlets that you can run on PowerShell. And one of the advantages it has is I've used the website more than the PowerShell commands, is if you knew you needed to create a lot of teams with lots of channels, it's a scripting language, so very quickly you can go, right, here it is. And you can do it in the user interface and create templates and copy them, but there's always little unique settings that you have to wait for it to be created and go back into the team or in the channel to create settings. So there's, the only reason you really have these scripting environments is I can do a lot of stuff faster than I can manually. If you're doing one every now and again, you probably wouldn't bother. So Microsoft Graph is sort of the direction a lot of things are going towards, even more so than, like that XML file we're looking at. You'd probably be encouraged to start dipping your toe in the water with Microsoft Graph. At the moment, support for Android as well as Windows. And that's the sort of information that you'll get. So it'll tell you all the devices, the manufacturer model, and it's, you might also see its current state, but it's really extracting information from, what your Teams admin center is aware of. So that's the sort of stuff that you can get. Give me a list. You can do a restart command. You can run diagnostics. That'll come back and tell you some general information on it. You can look at the force update of software list operations. Not all of them notice work for Android ones. You'll notice Microsoft, but some of them do work for Android devices as well. Now I can't say I've experimented too much with it, but that's the sort of based on JSON as well. So you might sort of steal one from a website and just tweak it to suit your need. If you don't want to use the PowerShell version of Microsoft Graph, there is a website you can go to. So this is notice the switch on there /devices. There's stuff you have to do. You have to prove that you've got Teams admin rights to make these changes. You also go into permissions and you say, what can this tool do? So you might say, read this only, read and edit certain things. So when we create teams, we allow it to create teams and groups. That's the only thing we allow this tool to be capable of doing. And then there's code that you can steal. There's a couple of examples. You can also provide credentials at that point. And that, but there's also a PowerShell commandlet. So you connect to Microsoft Graph, put your credentials in as well, and then get devices. That's the sort of information that you can run. And that's a list, I think, of them there. Yeah, so that first screen I brought up, that's the code that produced that. But yeah, you can use the website. And I'll be honest, I've probably only used it for creating Teams channels and settings in there. And there's a couple of things that you can only do in Microsoft Graph. Well, you can certainly do it faster. I think what we will do, it's 11:20. We'll have a break. I thought I was going to get to the end of this, but I noticed we're on slide 40 of 74, although I think I've got some hidden slides. There's some sort of heavy ones that drifts into some Surface Hub, which we've removed. So given that it's just about 20 past 11 my local time, how about we have a break and we'll make it back. We'll make it back in 15 minutes from your current time, but according to me, that'll be 11:35 Melbourne time. Hope everybody can do the mental arithmetic. Okay, Ben said the Android slides are missing from the PDF. All right, when we come back from the break, I might go back and see. I'll tell you what I will do. When you're at your break, I'll save this slide deck as a PDF and I'll put it in the chat. So all of module 6, I'll send it to you again. All right, enjoy your breaks and I'll see you soon. Okay, hopefully everyone's back. So we'll just continue on with module 6. I put a link in there. That's to my OneDrive. I just went file save as PDF of those slides. So if there were any missing ones for Android, you should have that in that latest set that I've sent through to you. Now we've got to a Windows only option, which is the Skype settings XML file. I have a feeling that now there's sort of, this might fade away and they'll make you use Microsoft Graph or some other type of technique. I could be wrong there. So with the XML file, you can do things like custom themes, screen sharing. What I would say is a lot of the stuff that you're seeing here, we could do it in the console itself, but of course you might want to do this on mass and roll it out to a whole heap of devices. But the one thing that you have to use it for is for a custom theme. If you want to, and there's a little bit more on that coming up a little bit later on. I have got, I believe, a URL which is down the bottom. Yeah, it's down the bottom of your notes there. But if it makes it any easier, that in the chat. So I don't know what happened there with the super font size, but there you go. That just might make it easier if you're interested on the settings, you know, what other settings are available in there. But they're sort of the main ones. So it looks like that. And use Notepad or some similar. Make sure it doesn't add any fancy formatting to it. All the parameters. You might see some of the ones here. It's got the name, the password, etc. Now you don't need to be concerned about exposing the password with this file unless you leave it somewhere on a network share. Because when you get it to the device, it's stored in an encrypted fashion. Once it's loaded, it's deleted. So you will never find a settings file on the device unless you copy it there and you leave it to do its nightly restart. But it is stored in an it gets, the file actually gets written to memory, encrypted, and then after it's rebooted, it's destroyed. So it's still got access to the settings there if you need. And it's again, it's optional, but you know, if you want to change the background settings, it's the only way I know at this stage. It has to be placed into that directory, right? So it can't be anywhere else. So you have to copy into there. Likewise, if you're going to do any custom themes, the JPEGs or the PNGs or whatever you choose to use, there's a few of them they support, have to be in the same location as well. So you can manually copy it to the device, USB if you need to, or you can use Intune, you can use group policy, you can run a PowerShell script. PowerShell by default won't allow you to do remote commands. You have to enable that. The best of my knowledge, you'd have to enable it one at a time and then you can do it. I don't think there's a remote way of enabling remote PowerShell script if you're not using like group policy. So that's a bit of a pill, but once you've done it, you can do it. Once you've copied it, you have to restart it or wait for its scheduled restart. But if you needed to, if you wanted to change the themes, the image must be exactly that 38040 3840 by 1080 pixels. Anything more or less, and it just doesn't work. They're the formats that's supported. There is a template in for Photoshop. You don't have to have Photoshop for doing it. Sorry for me fumbling around, but I've got the URLs, I think, somewhere here. So anybody that's really interested in it. It's one of those things I only did once a long time ago. Oh, yeah, that's pretty cool. I can't see me doing it too often. And then I know a lot of people say, oh, yeah, we do it all the time. So companies, integration companies that do it for large organizations, they want it, the theme changed. And that's sort of an example. So even that picture there of the spaceman in purple, that's not one of the default out of the box ones. There's a couple of things you can choose out of the box, but if you want to customize it, you can. So yeah, there's a free Photoshop plugin I think you can use for paint.net. So you can work with that PSD file that I've sent you there from Microsoft as a starting point. And that's pretty much how you apply it. So in the XML or the Skype settings XML file, you copy all those supporting graphics in exactly the same location. That's the configuration of it there. So the name of the JPEG. Don't have to worry too much about the components. You can just put ones in all of them if you like. You can play around if you want to. There's sort of backgrounds and images. If you wanted to, you could have a different background colored image, but that gets really sort of messy from that regard. And that's the path again. So it's got to be copied into that path along with the file and restart the device, and that will apply. Now, administrative, if you don't want to use the admin center and you choose to use PowerShell, so if you haven't played around with it before, it's command line utility, far more powerful, say, than just your standard DOS or command style parameters, and it does give you access to things like temporary variables and an easier way of looping and create functions and all the rest of it. So you can get quite involved with it. There are a lot of things in your administrative history or career where the only option is that you have to use PowerShell. And for a long time, Microsoft have been saying, hey, if you don't get on board with PowerShell, you're going to get left behind. And there's certainly times, I know I teach SharePoint as well. SharePoint on premises, there's a lot of things you can only configure with PowerShell, but at this stage, people can survive without it. But yeah, it's getting a bit harder. What I would say, if it's a simple thing, by all means, do some research on it and have a go. But some of these things are hard to undo. So anything really complex with PowerShell, I'm not just talking about for Teams rooms. If you haven't done it before, for God's sake, just, be very careful. Start off with some simple stuff, even if it's creating some accounts, as long as you let your boss know you're doing it, and then you can delete the user account if you get it wrong. Some of it can get quite heavy, but out of the box, PowerShell will come with a core set of commands. If you want to configure Exchange, or you want to configure Teams or Azure Active Directory, you got to add extra components to it. Primarily what we're doing is configuring this box, this Teams room device. So PowerShell is just command line utility that had was with administrators in mind. They were trying to, with programming language, and I don't do a lot of it. I used to do VBA script and Lotus script. I used to teach Domino. And you would have done things like, oh God, how many times we want this code to run? I don't know. You might be for every customer. I want to send them an email. How many customers have we got? I don't know, but we've got 1,000 at the moment. Next week we might have 1,200. So you had to sort of do a count of something and let n be equal to 2005, and then I is equal to 1 to 2005. Run it once. Next I, okay, second time. It keeps running until I ends up 2,501 or whatever I said before. And it was that iteration or looping was like a painful process for people that weren't brought up on coding. So you might have seen a pipe character, and a lot of that says do this, and the pipe, and that might say get all the customers in. Pipe this says, well, however many customers you got, just do the next thing. So it breaks it up into stages. So there's some things about it cool. So if you want to do remote PowerShell commands, you've got to configure that first. I've got that coming up for you. And at the moment, there isn't that much you can do other than grabbing log files, and that's the sort of information that you can get. But you can use it like for transferring files and stuff, which might be handy if you want to pass an XML file across to it. So to enable remote PowerShell, you've got to do that. Now, you could get a couple of complaints on some devices. With your firewall, you've got different profiles. There's a public, there's a private, so you might get some questions on that. So forced might help from that regard, but sometimes in Skype scenarios, I've seen like PS promoting, you've got to do skip network profile check force as well, just to get it to accept that. But once it's enabled, then you can start running some of these commands. So here's an example of just showing you all attached devices. So this is a Logitech Brio, and you can see all the peripherals that are attached to it and whether their status is okay. And there's another example there of its software version, whether it's joined to domains. This is a standalone item. It hasn't joined anything. So we're doing like manual administration, serial number, that type of information. Now, auto answer. This is an Android only thing. So if you want to have a room in a meeting, so let's say this person is not actually in the room, and maybe you've got staff or some customers, I'll let this keep running. So Adele is starting the meeting, and she wants the Teams room device sitting in whatever that conference room is, and maybe there's people there sitting waiting. She can have it auto join. And we're going to show you how you can configure that. Now you can go into the device settings on the unit itself, and under calling, there's a subheading called calling. You can scroll down a little bit, and it's got auto answer yes, but they go through PowerShell commands for Android, and that just means that once if they've added that room to the meeting, once Adele starts it, in 3, 2, 1, bang, that room will automatically join. It's a bit hard to see, but down the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see the cameras on. And whoever's sitting in that room is now in part of the meeting. That way you don't have to call somebody. Can you just go into meeting room 1 and press accept on the Teams room device for those people? You know, that type of option. So that's how you configure it. Is PowerShell. But as I said, you can do it through the graphical user interface if you choose to. Notice you've got to nominate the resource account for that to apply the policy. So it's a policy, and this I think is going through the GUI. Go down to scroll down to calling. Make sure you're administrator, then off you go. Automatically accept and start it automatically. That works well for some rooms. Yeah. Now the licensing, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, and there's a bit more in coming up in a second. But we've now got basic and pro. We used to have standard and premium. And early September, I think the 6th of September, if anyone cares, the licensing changed. Standard was $15 per device per month, and premium was $50 per device per month. What's happened now is you get basic license for free, up to 25 devices. So as soon as you go above 25 devices, you have to buy a pro license for every number above that. Having said that, what we're talking about here is, well, what does pro license bring to the table? Now, if you're already a company that's using the premium license, it's now come down to $40 per device per month, down from $50. Okay, so there's an advantage. This is really just talking about, well, if I opt for this, what do I get for my $50? Now, these are sort of the selling points, and there's some statistics that, consulting companies have put together. You gain more insights and analytical information to the devices and who's using them and why they aren't using them and how they're traveling. So that's good. You get like green lights for things running well, etc. So it's an AI service, artificial intelligence service, that's monitoring your devices, and it automatically raises issues for you if there is an issue. Now, some things can do auto resolution. For example, when you pull out a USB cable and plug it back in, this thing can actually do that, like going into services, it disables, and it's like a reset of the USB port. But there might be some other bits and pieces where it might start a log on again for you. So that's great from that aspect. What we do with this, other than the license, is an MSI package with the private key that you enter. And this ensures that if you are opting in for a third-party company to help you with this managed services, it also just means that the AI and the monitoring of the device is being handled. We know who it is that's handling it. It could be us, or it could be this service provider, OEM partner, that we're getting involved with for handling it. So the OEM partners can come out and consult to you, and in fact, there's a process you can go through where you can say, yes, we want help with our Teams room rollout, and then they can. There's some things that you can fill in and say, well, what am I looking towards from a timeline? What type of uses do we think we want? What features have we seen? And you might not know those things. So they actually get paid by Microsoft, because it's quite an investment in their time, and they can go through that. And in fact, they might then ask you to go to one of their display centers, or they might maybe be able to come out to your premises, and they'll actually say, well, based on what you've told us and what you would like, this is what your Teams room environment could look like, and here's the features and functions. So they can do a demonstration, and they can then put together a plan for you on timeline, what you need, the rollout of it, and it's quite a detailed one. But apart from that, those companies can also then do this managed service stuff for you. So rather than you contacting Microsoft directly for help or working through it yourself with Google, you've got this other company that's basically Microsoft's AI. If they detect a problem, they tell them, hey, you got a problem with Carol's company, with device whatever in this room, these are the issues. So you can actually get the date and time and what's causing the problem. They can try to proactively repair the error as much as they can. If they can't, you'll get in there's another portal that you use for this managed services, and you'll get notifications saying that, this is the problem, this is the date and time when we first see it, and this is a walkthrough on what you need to do to fix it. It's not just, read this article in Microsoft Docs. They actually walk you through what you need to do. So it's not just insights or this AI service monitoring it and telling you the problem and trying to do self-resolution. And of course you could take advantage of this and not opt to have a third party with managed services, and you can just do the stuff yourself. But you might find in a lot of cases the entity that you've chosen has solved the problem while you're not at work. The other thing that you're getting audio and video expertise. They might see a problem in another customer and know, hang on a minute, Cal's company is using exactly the same model. So they can actually be proactive in that regard. Maybe there's a firmware update that's causing a problem. And also things like denial of service attacks. They can actually then block that from occurring. And if they detect a problem and can resolve it on one device, they can actually say, well, this is going to be a problem with the other meetings rooms as well. We'll go ahead and do that for you. Right, they don't get access to the meetings or any of the content that is exchanged in the meetings. I think I said yesterday to you, a lot of times this gets lumped on IT, and I know from my experience, most of my colleagues and people I've worked with, they ain't audio video people. They look after servers and licenses and backups and SQL databases and those types of things, and mail servers, etc. But audio and video is another world, and sure, we've got network people that can assist with quas and all that sort of stuff. So you're gaining all their knowledge and information that they're obtaining early. Now, like Logitech might push you out there and say, well, we know we've got a problem with this one. So, right, they're aware of it before you're aware of it. So, yeah, it is. There's an extra cost involved, not only in the pro license, but in a contract if with a third party company. So these statistics basically show, hey, your meetings will start 8 times faster. It means you don't have to every morning walk around your company and go into all the meetings rooms, just make sure they're all running and they're working. And even if you did that, it might be fine in the morning, then something changes later on during the day. Maybe one of the network team changes, I don't know, the time server settings or something along those lines. And all of a sudden the device is playing up when the person's gone in to start the meeting. So you're going to be not only aware of that before the user walks into the room, of course, then they don't have to create a support ticket because it's been brought to your attention before. It'll actually give you the time. So while this remediation company can't do anything about your network time server settings, at least it's going to tell you at this time, this is where we have it. And you can stand up and say to the rest of the crew, what happened at 11 o'clock today? Oh, yeah, I changed the what's not. That might have caused a problem with the device being able to log on because maybe its access token has sort of expired, those types of things. So it's a manual restart. So anyway, there's just one example of some of the things that you can do with it. But yeah, there's an MSI that you got to run with a code you punch in, and that's basically just saying that you're happy for it to be remotely managed, for want of another term, and only by this entity. All right, not anybody that just happens to get hold of this sort of software, if you like. It's just a comparison about what you might have done traditionally. So ad hoc, you wait till somebody reports a problem. Maybe you do a sweep of all the rooms to make sure everything's running. And you just reactive, wait till an issue is reported with a ticket update. Maybe we do that. And one of the advantages with managed service is you get update rings. You can do it in Intune. Update rings is a way of saying, I'm going to group these devices. They get their updates and their feature updates and their quality updates on this schedule. Everything I put into this ring or this group, they get it differently. You can do it through here. So it's 24/7 monitoring of it. You always deal with this service, or if you're using a third party for managed service, I don't have to get stuck between contacting Microsoft or who's contacting Microsoft. Maybe there's a service issue. It's all handled by them. You get advantage of auto remediation if it's possible. Of course, not every problem can be fixed. And you can, as I said, these deployment rings, it's a way of grouping when they get their updates. Security patching, really with security updates, you get them whether you want them or not. The feature and quality updates you can control with when they get those things if you need to. And you get a hell of a lot of insights into the performance of a room and the usage of a room. So if you've got a couple of meeting rooms but everyone keeps favouring one over another, maybe you can start saying, well, what's the problem with the other room? And the speaker's not that great with it, or we just don't like something about the room. Get you better the value of this. I'm just reading Jason's message there. If I'm following your question there, Jason, because some of you might be, service providers in this regard. I've got a URL for everybody. I'd be contacting Microsoft because at the moment, sorry, I'm just going to go in my OneNote links. Here we go. This workshop, my understanding with this is that if a company wants help with their team's rollout, they don't, they know the features they want and they know what they like out of it, but they just don't know where to start. They can opt into this. There's a few templates from memory when I go through it. And my understanding is Microsoft are paying solutions providers, don't hold me to, I think it's about $5,000 because, it's like a week's work for you to put all this stuff together, and then you might go out to a customer and they might not go ahead with it. So they appreciate that there's time and money and effort involved in doing this. So I'm pretty sure this is still running. I'll give you my, some of you might know Andrew Higgs. Microsoft.com. He would probably be the best one to email an answer to that, because I know there's also the expert zone. If you're a partner, you can go into expert zone and there's some online training and some information you can get access to. But he'd be the best one to start with. But that allows you to, maybe go to a customer and say, have you had a look at this? Or you don't have to use that tool, but it's sort of Microsoft trying to help businesses grow their team's room, but they're sponsoring, if you like, solutions providers, because they realize sometimes you go through a lot of effort doing a quote and a demonstration and nothing comes of it from a sale perspective. But the way the service desk has changed at Microsoft, it's still there, but really what Microsoft want people to do is that they'll provide information from this to a service provider, so they're aware of it, and then the client just deals with the service provider. The service desk at Microsoft is still available, but there was a lot of confusion in the past as who's telling Microsoft and all the rest of it. So that they're sort of encouraging, they're wanting businesses to go down this path, not just to grow their business, but for support, so people have a better experience. But as to which companies do it, off the top of my head, I've probably got, last time I ran a sales session, I don't run the sales sessions anymore, but I know to a lot of service provider companies, they have training for them, and that's basically talking about, the advantages of the licenses and stuff like that can help them mention that to businesses as to why it's in their interest and why it's good value for money. But yes, shoot off an email there. But that's the workshop that companies can now get access to and say, hey, we're interested in this, and then they can be put in contact with a nearby solutions provider, via that service. And in there's different models or templates you can choose, because you might say, well, I don't need Surface hubs and I don't want this and this and this, but I certainly want this type of functionality from it. I hope that's of help. Certainly what I've been told, if anybody's got any follow-up questions or something, Andrew's very cool dude at Microsoft. I'm sure he's more than happy. If I'm positive he'll be the one who'll have the answer for you. If not, he will get somebody to get back to you on that. NTT I know is one, but there's probably a list of more of them that do it. So yeah, that's just sort of by using managed services. Now it's a different portal that you log into, and it gives you more insight. So you can see here, there's all the rooms, and I can click on it, its utilization. It drills down and gives you a bit more information about when it was used, the number of meetings, how long the duration was for. You might find this information useful. Certainly if somebody's favouring one over another. And partners, so if you do it yourself, we've got this type of things. So you can opt in with a pro license and use the portal and do some stuff yourself, but with partner solutions, you're adding to all this, so the automatic updates or the controlling of the updates and the insights, etc., and the AI monitoring. But with a partner solution, you're getting that's an extra cost on top of the license. They can do all the change management for you. Contact, they offer, a concierge sort of service for you if you like. They're also aware of other companies with the same model as you, same firmware issue. Manufacturers are often letting them know there's a firmware update that people might need, or they've discovered a firmware update's causing problems with this, so they can help you out with those types of things too. But I've got, the NTT mentioned a couple of times. So in the past, the customer might contact NTT when a device goes down. Then if they couldn't find the issue, they couldn't auto heal it, they would then contact service desk for Microsoft. Well, now with managed services, your partners should already be aware of the issue. So there's cutting out of that middleman, if you like. It's not Microsoft trying to bow out of the solution. They're just trying to make a streamlined fix there for you. And remote management, all you need to do, so there's just some broad things you can do. You can control updates of software, firmware if you need it, and you can remote in reboots, reset USB ports, those types of things. Can collect the diagnostic logs. They can start looking at those things for you. Might tell you stuff like a problem with the resource account logging on. There's an issue with the network at that point in time. So it brings all those things, cabling, loose cabling, it'll tell you that. Now, if they can't do auto remediate, as I said, you get a detailed walkthrough on what needs to happen on that device. You don't just get a link to a docs article, which is you can, if you've experienced that before, you can spend quite a bit of time. For managed services to work, no really additional ports need to be open. It's all 443. But the advanced message queuing protocol, just a binding service for tunneling connections for this type of service. Make it easier on firewalls by just using a 443. It's an interesting one, isn't it, with firewalls and 443? Everything's using 443, and so now well, we're letting a lot of stuff in there. It used to just be HTTPS, but now it's a lot of bits and pieces, which is good from a firewall simplicity point of view. But if you are sort of monitoring, you need to do a bit more work. So that was looking at how can we manage the Android and the Windows Teams devices. So the settings that we want to change, we looked at PowerShell, we looked at Microsoft Graph, we looked at the admin center for monitoring it. Now we're starting to look at things such as well, what about the operating system, the underlying operating system? So in the case of Windows, when you have a Teams room for Windows, you have a compute. That's the term they use for the small form factor PC. And how are we going to manage that? This is where it starts talking about, well, do you want it to join it to Active Directory? Do you want to join it to just to Azure Active Directory? Do you want to use Intune? Do you want to use Config Manager? Goes in a little bit of detail. What is Azure Active Directory? What is Config Manager? I'll move through that and give you generally what people use it for. But because, well, the slide says it's not just another computer, we've got to be very careful of that. It's running Windows 10 Internet of Things, or IoT. And it sort of runs in kiosk mode. So as I said before, there's certain things that when it's running and it's logged on with the resource account, or the box fires up, that it only runs the team rooms software. Browsers can't run, keyboard shortcuts can't be passed through to it. Sure, if you plug the keyboard into it and you go into Windows settings, you provide the admin console, yeah, then you're going to open up a browser and a few other bits and pieces. And in fact, you might need to do that to do updates. You might even want to run the Teams client in a browser just to make sure the resource account is not experiencing a problem with maybe proxy settings or something. But yeah, the resource account can't do that. So I'm reminding you about that, bypassing the web proxy. We know the device is fairly well locked down, but in here we'll also look at some other things we can do if it makes you feel a bit more comfortable about it. But also some cautionary statements as well. But yeah, think of it as it's kiosk. It's not just a PC. Therefore, when you do these things, like join it to Active Directory, remember you've probably got default group policies. Well, you do have default group policies. If you haven't played with group policies, there's always one default at the domain level. It typically handles your security password logons, and it might be how many attempts for a password before you're logged out. how many minutes you're logged out for if you're going to do that, and how frequently you have to change your password, and how many password history is retained. There's all those types of things, which is great, but on these devices, we don't want it. And we've got to be very careful about multi-factor authentication and password expiry and locking accounts out. So you can manage the device by joining Azure Active Directory and or Active Directory. So Active Directory on premises, Azure Active Directory is roughly your domain control in the cloud. That's a bit of a simplification of it. Endpoint Manager, well, Endpoint Manager gives you access to some compliance, config manager settings, but we'll mainly focus on Intune. At one point we had Intune Admin Center, and when you wanted to use config manager in System Center, you went to its tool. And when they started to allow co-management, they renamed the Intune admin website to Endpoint Manager. And there are some settings that offer a few other options, but we'll mainly focus on the Intune stuff. And for that, it only needs to be enrolled in Intune and or as your Active Directory. It does not have to be joined as in an OU as a computer object in Active Directory on-prem. Okay? And that's probably the angle I come in on. I think, yeah, I'm happy for it to be an Azure AD as long as I'm careful of default conditional access policies and also Intune policies for compliance. All right. It's got to be a bit conscious of the time. And then group policies. Well, to get group policies, the object has to be joined to Active Directory on-prem. You've got to be very careful about defaults, as example mentioned before, that password one. So what you can do when you're applying or excluding conditional access and policies, depending on where you enroll the device, for use of another term, you can create groups that contain just the Teams room accounts and maybe the Windows operating system on the computer object itself. And I mentioned dynamic device groups, so you can say if the prefix and the name's got MTR in it, automatically make it a member of this group. Some dynamic group membership might not be supported in this, so you might find if you like all the features or you're going down that path about having it joining in Active Directory and group policy, you're trying to exclude it from things, just be aware that dynamic device is very, very handy, but they might not work in all circumstances. So you certainly want a group with all these things in it, because you might want to say these policies just to apply to these devices, or here's the generic company policy. I don't want it to apply to these resource accounts or these computers. That's really what we're getting at here. So excluding them from default conditional access policies, compliance settings in Intune, which we're coming to, multi-factor can be handled a number of ways, but typically it's in conditional access policies. And I'd also like to say if it's Active Directory on premises, you've got OUs, and all OUs in Active Directory on-prem are receiving default policy settings from the domain, group policies. So taking it a little bit further, those devices, so they're running kiosk mode, so they come locked down from the vendor themselves. And this is, I won't read all of these out, but, as I said, the keyboard things don't work. It won't, if once it's joined a domain, if you do join a domain, it can't join another domain like a local domain or a non-domain network. Controls all those types of things. Wi-Fi can be disabled. And really just sort of mentioning this to let people know that, look, you can bypass the web proxy because they come locked down by default. Now, this is really important. Secure boot, DMA protection, and that's basically making sure all the code has come from the manufacturer. Somebody hasn't swapped a file, let's say in your System 32 or your Windows folder, with a rogue version of a file. It's all been digitally signed by the appropriate party. It's not a copy of a file. It's running and it looks normal to you, like rootkits, those types of things. So it comes pretty good out of the box. But yeah, we can play around with it if it ticks a box, or it makes some people feel a little bit happy. The other thing is, it can only run one app at a time when it's logged on and performing its Teams function. So. But we'll also go through, there's a URL if you want to have a look at, by default, the things that it has. But we'll also look at, well, if you do want to join it to Azure Active Directory or Active Directory on premises, what things that we need to exclude it from, and is there anything that you want? Like Intune, we can do a compliance and say we want at least to have a firewall and a few other bits and pieces, like maybe malware installed on the operating system too. So if you opt for, what is Azure Active Directory? Bit conscious of the time here, but because we've got another module to get through, it's your domain controller in the cloud. And small businesses can have cloud-only objects, so all your users just exist at Microsoft. I don't need a domain controller on premises. For a small business, I would say, why not? You'd be crazy to do that. But there's legacy applications and on-premises resources that might be your only option. Most businesses that I deal with run in a hybrid mode, so you've still got some applications and resources on-prem, and they run Active Directory sync. But Azure Active Directory, think of it as your domain control in the cloud. So it has your users, your resource accounts, computers are sort of there in the background. And when you authenticate, it's the one that says, yeah, but it also does more than that. You can roll out applications. There's also conditional access, which we're coming to. That's probably the main thing that we're trying to sell in this regard. So if you like conditional access, the devices have to join to Azure AD. Okay, and you might like some of that stuff if you're thinking of bypassing a proxy, and we'll show you some recommended default settings if you like. So how do we enroll a device to Azure Active Directory? Well, you can do it from settings. You can really log in as an admin mode and hit the Windows key and type access, work, or school, or just type access. I normally do that and I choose access, work, or school, and in there you follow the prompts and it says, yes, I want to join Azure Active Directory, and you just put in your admin password and name, and off it goes. But there are other ways of doing it. If you've got Config Manager and Windows Config Designer, you can do provisioning packages to do that. But from a one-off, Intune also has a device enrollment manager that you can get somebody on site to do it for you. Just reminding that maybe you want dynamic grouping where anything with a prefix that's got TR hyphen in it, it automatically becomes a member of your Teams room groups, and you can use that for excluding or including with policies. There are a couple of things that if you see dynamic groups aren't supported on this slide, just be aware. So you might have to create a static group and make sure you're adding all your new Teams room devices to it. Just depends on how many. It's handy for users too. You can assign licenses and access to Teams. So if your department equals sales, you're automatically a member of this user group. That means you also get access to this Teams and you get this application. So people use it for that too. But it's an easy way of excluding from default policies. Now, if you like conditional access, it has to be joined to Azure Active Directory. So conditional access comes with a number of parameters. So who do you want to assign it to? And there's a slide on each of these coming up. And then the system goes, okay, this is one of these people. What am I looking out for? What are the conditions that Cal's asked me to look out for when they run a specific app? Normally, I have these two the other way around. So when these people launch this app, look for these conditions. And if they're found, what do you want to do? So you can say, no, they can't get in, or yes, they can get in. And where we've got to be careful of is there might be an option where you say the device has to be joined, hybrid joined, meaning it's joined to Azure Active Directory and Active Directory on premises. If you've got that as a default and your Teams room device isn't enrolled in AD on premises, it's not going to launch. Or you might say they've got to have multi-factor authentication. Well, that's going to fail because we don't want to have resource accounts logging on with multi-factor authentication. And if you haven't got, if it can't meet compliance in Intune because you forgot these devices are different to standard PCs, we're going to have problems with it. So I'll break these down a little bit more. Assignments, you can choose these users, members of these groups. You can also choose directory roles. So everybody that's a global administrator, maybe I have more strict settings on them when they connect to maybe Azure management tools. You can also put guest access in there as well. Oh, if they're an external person or a guest, I'm going to ask them to do a little bit more. So that's the starting point. Generally, it would be then choosing the app. But let's come back to that because the slides are in a different order. We've got user risk and sign-in risk. Now, it's a bit of a tricky one to go through given the time frame, but you can opt in for Azure Identity Protection, at which Microsoft, using artificial intelligence, is looking for suspicious logons. Now, a user risk is Microsoft saying this is highly unlikely that it's the user, right? It's a hacker. And it could be like we've seen the name and a password on the dark web. Somebody's logging on with the Tor browser, Impossible Travel. They've logged on in Sydney. Now they're logging on in New York 5 minutes later. So you can opt in for that. There's some defaults that automatically block the login, or you can say, oh yeah, but I'm going to force a password reset. I haven't got time to go through all those things, and it doesn't just apply to Teams Room. Sign-in risk is more, well, it could be the user, but there's something about the logon we're not happy with. So it's a new location we haven't seen you log on from. You're logging on from potentially a compromised PC. You're logging on from a network location where we've seen a lot of failed logon attempts. That's just a sprinkling of them. So you can test that for one of the conditions. You can also choose the platform. That's important to us, because where we're going with this is we want to use conditional access. I just want to make sure that when the device fires up and the resource account logs on, that it's on our network, so a hacker can never log on outside of the corporate network, and it can only use Windows or Android if you've got Android devices. Okay, and it can only run the following apps. Any other app, browsers, no, you can just lock it all down. So it's another way of saying, well, let's bypass the web proxy. We'll get a performance benefit. We know it's running in kiosk mode. It's secure by default. We've also got these things in place to protect the account from being hacked. So that's where it's going with this. This is really useful. Locations, what you can do is create IP subnets. Now, they have to be the IP subnets that are seen on the internet, not private IP addresses like 10 dots and 172s. They've got to be whatever's Microsoft sees, so through your NAT boxes, if that helps. And what you're sort of telling Microsoft is these accounts can only log on from these locations. Or when you log on from anything but these locations, I'm going to ask you to use multi-factor authentication. But if you're logging on at work, we won't worry about it. It's a fairly secure environment. Yeah, that's where it's typically used from. So, if it's an internal IP address, we can maybe not bother about multi-factor authentication, but anything outside, yeah, definitely we want it. So we can also say these devices can only log on in one of our networks. So again, a hacker's going to find it very hard to gain access to anything because they wouldn't be physically in the network. Controls. So if all those conditions are met, then you can say, well, block, or you can say only if they've got all these things they are allowed in. Now, you can ask for multi-factor authentication, which you would do for users. You're not doing it for resource accounts. Make sure that's very common that they do that. Now, you might have all users must do multi-factor authentication if they're logging on outside of the work premises. That's okay. But if you're saying all times, well, your resource accounts can't do it. They don't have a mobile phone. Require the device to be marked as compliant. Now, we're going into Intune to talk about that. If you are saying, okay, well, we've got all these settings and we know all the corporate PCs will be compliant. Well, are you absolutely sure that these kiosk Teams Room computes are going to be able to meet with that requirement? And in fact, in some cases, they can't. So here is examples of what you might like to do. So you've got your shared device group with all your Teams rooms in it. That's taken care of. So that's who you're applying it to. The apps that they're allowed to run is only these three. So Exchange for the calendaring, Teams because it's Teams, and people might want to share PowerPoint slides in the environment. So we've got to allow that. And in this case, just in this example, we're saying that the operating system must be Windows. All right. And if that's all good, we can grant access. And optionally, we can say the device must be marked as compliant. We'll come back to that because I've got to do that in Intune. Locations, all trusted locations. Yeah, I thought something was missing. All right, so if a hacker gets in and they're logging on from somewhere other than a work network and they're just firing up a browser, we're saying, no, this is only apps they're allowed to run. And in Intune, we have compliance policies, and you can do a lot in there. There's configuration policies, and there's also compliance policies. So here we're just saying how we would like the firewall enabled, Defender enabled. Now that's not Defender for endpoint, that's just Defender in the OS. And if it doesn't have those two, then immediately mark the device as non-compliant, which therefore, when a device re-syncs itself with Intune, if it doesn't have this, it'll go, oh, not compliant, therefore conditional access won't allow it in. So maybe somebody's gone in and, turned this off. That's going to stop it from gaining access to these apps. And then you do another one for the shared device group. Any of the devices logging on to any other cloud app, from any other operating system. So notice Windows is excluded from them, and we're just adding everything but Exchange, SharePoint, and Teams. And we're going to block. Done. Don't have to do anything in Intune. It's not going to get that far. Now, Endpoint Manager is a little bit of a history of it. Think of Endpoint Manager as the admin center for doing things like compliant testing, but you can do lots of stuff. There's autopilot. You can ship PCs out to users and they just log on and everything's there. And I can give you your VPN settings, your certificate settings, when your updates apply on the device. There's a lot of things you can do with it. And it sort of came out recognizing that as cool as Config Manager was in System Center, it only worked with domain joined devices. Whereas Intune can say, well, I don't care if you're joined the domain or not. It could be somebody's home PC. It could be just jumping on the library, jumping on a PC. We can do mobile phones, other operating systems. You can also control the app. So whenever you launch Outlook, I don't care whether you're on a work allocated device or a non-work allocated device. To get access to Exchange, you have to use Outlook. You can't use a built-in mail tool that came with your Asus tablet, etc. You can do all sorts of stuff. Okay, so a lot of companies that have used Config Manager in System Center love it, don't want to walk away from it. Software and hardware inventory, you can handle the updates. You can also monitor the devices in real time and see how they're tracking, etc. Perform bulk operations on it, test them for compliance. Very similar to what Intune can do, but it does need to be domain joined devices. I'm going to move through that a little bit. We're going to focus mainly on Intune. Intune doesn't have to be a device joined to Active Directory on-prem, because I'm a bit of a fan of that. Just me personally. But as long as the devices have access to the internet, well, they do, and we enroll them with Intune, Intune can test them for compliance. And we can even roll out some settings if we want to, which is where we've got to be careful if we go down this path, make sure that they have their own policies or they're excluded from default policies. So Intune, you still go into Endpoint Manager to configure the stuff for Intune. Capabilities, roll out apps. I can click on a device, it'll tell me its operating system, its manufacturer, the apps that are installed on it. I can do a retire or wipe. So if somebody leaves the business, retire leaves personal information on it, but it removes corporate information and removes it from management. Wipe is a factory reset. There's all sorts of stuff you can do in here. You can roll out VPN certificates, Wi-Fi's, printers, cloud printers, all sorts of stuff you can do. It's basically group policy. The devices just have to be managed by Intune. They don't have to be corporate-owned devices or enrolled. All right, so what actually happens here for device, so I've set all these policies up. They just work in conjunction. So when a device fires up or syncs, it goes to Intune. Intune might go, okay, I'm going to test to see if it's compliant or not, marks the device as compliant, and then conditional access in Azure Active Directory will determine whether it's okay or it's blocked. You know, we looked at that before. That's sort of what happens. But Intune sort of reports on its compliance first. We've got to configure all those policies. For a device to get conditional access, it's got to join Azure Active Directory. As I said, you can do it through hitting the Windows key and type access in Access Work or School. There are other methods of doing it. You can configure Azure Active Directory to have devices when they enroll in Intune to automatically register as a computer object in Azure AD. So there's other ways of doing it, should you need. Intune broadly, and there's some other things that they have compliance settings. Now that's in blue because that's what we were sort of hinting at before, but there are other things. Configuration managers where you roll out, well, staff can't get to the control panel. I don't want people to go to the Windows App Store. Here's your cloud printer. Here's your network printer. Here's your certificate settings, your VPN settings. Wonderful, wonderful tool. So you can do other things in here. We're just going to focus on the compliance settings. So what we would want is BitLocker and secure boot and code integrity. Code integrity just makes that the files that make the software run haven't been modified. Sony got in trouble years ago when you bought a Sony music CD. If you put it in your PC to play it, it was swapping a Windows Microsoft version of a file with their own. And they said they were tracking it for marketing purposes, but yeah. So that's what rootkit is a term that they often hear. Now, BitLocker basically means at rest. On a PC, you can have BitLocker on a drive, if it's TPM version less than version 2. If you would like the boot partition or the boot drive to be protected as well, it has to be TPM version 2.0. Teams room devices are. So basically you can say, this will only boot up. It's protected, so protection against BIOS, screwing up and all those types of stuff. So by default, they're TPM2 capable. They might not necessarily. You just want to make sure that you are going for this option, and that's just sort of confirming for them to be compliant. I've wanted to list those 3 on. Look, there can be other stuff. You can enroll the device in Defender for endpoint, other settings if you want, but just be careful. I have got a URL coming up. I'll get it for you right now. If in doubt, you can go to this site and say, what can I use in here? And what can I not use in compliance policies? Because there's a lot in here that won't work on the Teams Room operating system. And there's just a few other things for compliance. I want the firewall on. It's got to be TPM capable, antivirus, anti-spyware, Defender. That's not Defender for endpoint. There's some things that you might turn on. They are optional, but yeah, you can turn them on there. So you're just saying for the device to be compliant, I want all these things on, and that will help. Add local admins. There's a link there if anybody's interested on doing that. So you can't add a group to a local admin, but you can add individual accounts to the local admin. So if you wanted to have devices that are locally managed, they're not joining Intune or anything like that, you can use this to add the main account logons to local admins on boxes on mass if you wanted to do it that way. If a device, so this is supported stuff for conditional access. So that's that link I just put in the chat for you before. So they're just saying, hey, there's a lot of stuff in compliance settings. These things are supported, the BitLocker and the boot sector code integrity stuff, but you can't do things like has to have this minimum operating system or maximum operating system. And that's quite important. Sometimes when people are using their own operating systems to connect to corporate information, you can go, some of the older operating systems don't work well with multi-factor authentication or don't prompt for multi-factor authentication. And things like iOS, like iPads 8.0 or earlier, you sort of avoid those. It doesn't mean they're a problem, but modern authentication might not. So they're just sort of saying, hey, these ones are supported, but that's a list of everything that is or isn't. If you want to use group policy, the device has to have joined Active Directory on-prem. I'm not encouraging you to do that. You can do it manually with command prompts to do it. If you're using Skype for Business, on-prem, then you'd be doing that. But if you're familiar with group policy, a little bit like Intune, there's a lot of settings you can roll out to devices, which you might find very, very handy. You can certainly roll out scripts, but it would help with QoS settings, quality of service. I'm a bit of a fan of setting that at the network level rather than at the device level. You can roll it out to the device, but if your routers and switches aren't being told what to do with it to give a priority of service, then it means very little. The advantage with configuring it on the operating system on the device, it means the data's coming out already with its tag. So one of the routers doesn't have to classify all the inbound traffic. Oh, is this one of these Teams things? And it's already coming in pre-tagged. So there is some advantages there. So if you do want to put domain users into a local admins group on the devices, setting up certificates for Skype and changing the time service. So there are some options with group policy. You just got to be absolutely careful that, you've got an OU with all the Teams Room devices in it and that you're breaking inheritance with any parent group policy, because you'll screw something. And a lot of these things, there's no undo. And you might be going back to the manufacturer and getting a new image and just starting it from scratch. It can be pretty hideous. Update management. So we talked a little bit about it. If you at 2 o'clock in the morning, it goes off and it looks for the Teams update and the Windows update, pulls it down, and in half an hour's time, it then does the restart. So it installs all the updates, looks for any XML file that you may have transport to it, but you remember I showed you in the admin center, you can pump changes out, or you can physically walk an XML file to the device. If you don't do a restart, then it'll just sit there and wait for it to do the restart. So it actually does that as well, and then it removes any XML file from the device, and then it's ready to go. And that's why I said when you first out of box, you can leave it for 2 or 3 days, and it probably will update both the things. Now, when it comes to Windows updates, security updates always apply. There's no block on security updates, but there's a built-in feature on the Teams Rooms devices to not allow automatic updates of Windows. The reason for that, as I mentioned this morning, the Teams client has to update first. It will block anything update to the operating system that's not certified to run with Teams. There is registry hacks in there that have that on, so you can mess with these things if you want to, but you really sort of shouldn't do that. But that's sort of how it works. Now we've just got the one module to go in a half an hour according to my timing. Hopefully we'll be able to do this. Now, when we were running this as a day, we made time for the exam at the end of it, but that was 7 hours or 8 hours if you exclude lunch. Now we've broken them up into these 3 hourly ones. I'll give you the link for the online exam and the digital badge. But in the past, in a day, I would have sat here and just waited for half an hour, just have a chat with everybody how they go. We're not going to have time to do that. I'll just give you the link so you can work that through that in your own time. Let's look at this last one. There's a little bit to get into, but nothing too complicated in here. It's really just going through some features that you'll only get with Teams Native. And I sort of mentioned that yesterday. A lot of the stuff that we discuss is it has to be Teams. It can't be Zoom and WebEx, but I'm using the Teams Room device. Yeah, that's all supported, but some of these features go, no, it's got to be a native Teams environment. So make sure that you're aware of that. And some of these things I hinted at, like front row and intelligent cameras, etc., and Bluetooth. We've got some animated slides here that might make that look a little bit more obvious to everybody. I'll read through your response there, Ali, in a second. Yeah, I hope that's answered your and everybody else's questions. Yeah, that's good. All right, so let's have a look at some new features, and then just maybe some signage and some training. There's some links that you can pull down, some stuff and posters and things that you can start sending out or placing around a place, letting people know that, hey, we've now got Teams Rooms, and maybe get people a little bit enthused about it. And then it finishes off with a little bit of some common troubleshooting. So features, we have panels. So what the panels are is they are a touchscreen device, and you can actually mount them outside the room if you want to. Now, Neat and some of the Android solutions, you can have them outside the meeting room, and then people can take them into the room, and then they become the Teams control panel if you wanted to. A lot of them, though, are separate devices. You still log on with the same resource account as you do for the control panel, but they're a visual clue. These are the ones that people often want to brand. So I can see that it's available, and I can click and reserve it. I've got a meeting now, and I can also see some meetings coming up throughout the day. So it's very cool from that point of view. If I do, click on reserve, it'll give me that, when do I think it's going to end. So I can choose an end time and go bang. So people can walk past it, see its use, when it's in use, what's coming up later on in the day. That's the thing where you might want to be careful with the subject of the meetings. You want people to be able to see that. People can check in. So when you walk in a room, you can use it for a check-in. A lot of the times, if you're using panels, with most Android devices, once you go into the room and you start the meeting from the console inside the room, that automatically checks you in. You might find in some panels, people have to remember to press check in from the screen when they first walk in the room. Only available on Android panels. Lots coming to Windows versions as well soon. Can't tell you when, but you have the knock feature. So if we're outside and we've booked a meeting and these people inside are going overtime, we can press on a button and they'll get this indication saying, hey, your time's up, and there's people outside waiting to use the room. So it's just a nice way. Like the Academy Awards, you get the music playing in the background and hurry everybody up. Intelligent speakers, this is one of those EPOS ones. That was sort of the first ones on. It's a microphone, really, There's a couple of things this can do. If it's an intelligent speaker, you can use the voice commands for Cortana, but also what users can do is register their voice. I'll show you a screenshot on how they do that. And then if I'm in a room up to 10 voices maximum at the moment, instead of seeing room 1, so-and-so said the following, as long as I've registered my voice, the intelligent speaker will detect uses digital imaging and it's got thumbprints and stuff on it, so it's all secure. It'll know it's my voice and it'll have my name above the text as it appears, which is really good. Whereas in the past, if we were in a room, it'll just say room 1 and the text would appear there. You wouldn't know who was saying it. So everybody in the business can register their voices, but at the moment it only supports 10 people in the room at a time. Anything over that just gives it an aneurysm. So there's a couple of requirements. The upload link must be 7 megabits per second to support it. 10 at the moment is the maximum. You can configure it with PowerShell, but there's also other ways of doing it as well. You don't have to always use the PowerShell there. Make sure that it's the default speaker. You want it for doing that as well. And over the settings we looked at this morning with the post out of box experience. And this is what a user does. They go to their Teams client and go into settings and under recognition, click started, get started, walk through that process. You have to have samples of your text. You say a few things and once it's happy with it, stored in the cloud. If you're not invited to a meeting for I think 3 years, it automatically deletes it. However, administrators can get access to it at any time if they want to, and they can download it or export it if for some reason people don't want it. Intelligent speakers again can use Cortana. So, hey Cortana, start a meeting. Hey Cortana, call whoever. So you have to have an intelligent speaker for the wake commands to work. Some microphones will allow you to press the button. You might get away with some of the commands, but for full support, you want a proper intelligent speaker. It supports those languages. You can change the wake word or enable the wake word if you want to in the Skype XML, but a lot of the manufacturers have them. EPOS was the first one, but most of the manufacturers have them now. Third party join. So this is where you might allow WebEx or Zoom or BlueJeans or GoTo. There'll be support for that very, very soon. And it's a little bit hard to see. I don't know if I can zoom in on this, but the logos at the top will tell you, whether it's Teams or a third party. Now, a lot of features go out the window. HDMI ingest won't work. Dual monitor support doesn't work. Raised hands don't work because you can get raised hands and you can actually see the order of who raised their hands coming with some native experiences, but certainly support it. Remember, there were some properties that we looked at where you can say, will we support it for which alternative names when you're using one of those meetings, so it's clear for everybody else. And I also mentioned watch out for the links because Exchange might rewrite URLs for safe links. You've got to make sure that they're excluded from that policy because they'll just break it's all using web and URLs for this service, and it'll break it if it's because if you've ever seen safe links, you probably have it at work. When you hover over a URL, have a look down the system tray and you might see nam1.safelinks blah blah blah. So it's a URL redirection and they just make sure that the device is okay. Hoping you can't hear that power tool next door. Coordinated meeting join. So this is where you've got, another Teams room device or typically a Surface Hub. And I don't want to have to remind the users they've got to add the Surface Hub as an attendee of the meeting, walk over to the Surface Hub, start the Teams software, join the meeting, and then go back to the Teams room console. We don't want that. We want it to just automatically join. As soon as I start the meeting in the Teams room, the Surface Hub will kick in. So we looked at that a little bit earlier. So you choose coordinated meetings. And then in the bottom box, you put the trusted device. So in the Teams room console, I'll be typing the Surface Hub details down here, and I want the mic and the camera to be turned on that the Teams room device looks after. On the Surface Hub, I'd be going in here, enabling coordinated meetings, be turning off the camera and microphone on it, and I would be typing in the resource account to the Teams room device. So you've got to establish that trust in there for that to work. As I said before, whiteboards, the Teams rooms don't have whiteboards. It's all stored temporarily in OneDrive, so the resource accounts don't get OneDrive. So a user in the meeting has to start Microsoft Whiteboard, and people can use it then. And if you've got a monitor that supports touch, people can write on the whiteboard too. If you've got a Surface Hub, and that's one of its key features. And even people with mobile devices, they can all start drawing on the whiteboard if that's what you want to do. But yeah, it just means a user's got to start it. But Surface Hubs, if you've got a touch screen, you want to use it, you might have to go into the properties and enable it, and also calibrate it. Sometimes, you put the pen or whatever you're using on the screen and it's slightly off to the right, and it can be very, very confusing. So you can go through, calibrate, and people might have a tablet that you're using for writing on to joining in. It's a separate USB connection for that. Content cameras. So showed you that a little bit before. The next one's actually a better example, but it's pointed to a whiteboard. Now, green and red whiteboard colors is a bad move, whether you're using content cameras or not. But the camera's picking this up, and it tries to keystone it or square it up, if you like. So you can see on the right-hand picture, they've mounted it above the whiteboard, which is great. And it's just been displayed on the console in the meeting. And this next screen, hopefully this runs fairly quickly. So see how that's squared it up? So even though the camera is actually above, pointing down, that's not me, by the way, I've got the same haircut. But see how it's squared it up, which is really cool from that regard. And people can still write, yeah, that's lags a little bit when it's played the whole lot. Very, very cool. And also they become a ghost, so you can still see the text in there. Very, very useful feature. You're not going to get that with non-native experience. Content cameras, it has to be a supported content camera. You can't pick just any old camera from the drop-down box and leave the content enhancements on feature by default. You can configure it via other means. It's also in the XML config file. You can do that too. Other experiences, we talked a little bit about Bluetooth, how you can automatically get a Teams room to join a meeting from your mobile phone using Bluetooth. Now, it's a low strength Bluetooth signal. So it's not going to people over the road, and their company's going to be able to pick it up. Now, the room can't be in use. Also, some of the other features that I'll show you have to be an attendee of the meeting. So somebody can't just walk past with their mobile phone and start playing up with it. You can cast from your device, any Bluetooth device. I'm assuming a phone, but anything that's Bluetooth enabled, and you can share your videos. You can also control some things in the meeting. You'll see some examples in a second. So proximity join. I start my meeting and I click add, and it might even come up and say, hey, you're near this room and it's available. And you say, yes, please, can you add that? And I just click, there we go, bang. I've just started that Teams room as long as it's available. Now, guests can't do this. You have to be a member of the, same with the voice recognition, you have to be a member of the license in the company. Proximity beaconing. So here we are on my mobile device, and up the top, marketing review meeting. I'm going to join that, and then, or I can be in here, join. So this is the animated slide. So you can be on any device that's Bluetooth. See how it's got recommended room. You can pick it from there, as long as it's detecting it. And bang. So I don't have to have included it in the invite. In fact, at that time, I didn't know if we were going to use a Teams room, which Teams room was available, but I'm in the vicinity of it. I can see one of the Teams room capable environments is there. So bingo, in I go. Nice and cool from that. It might take a little bit. I think this is another one, proximity join. You might have to wait a few seconds. Bang, here's all the rooms that are available that are free. And you're connected. Nice feature. So you can jump into a room, at the time. You don't have to have advanced knowledge that you're going to use it. Requires that the main operating systems, the user status must not be set to do not disturb, otherwise it's not going to offer them to you, and it can't already be in use. So it's got to be free for it to offer that to you. This is where, from a Windows perspective, don't put the small form factor compute a long way away from the Teams room itself, or in the room next door, might have a bit of a problem. Now, there were options in here that we looked at. It's coming up in the next slide, where you could say, well, I like proximity join for Bluetooth, but I don't want the remote control. So here's another example. If you enable it, so I don't have to be sitting in front of the console. I can find the room in here. I have to be an attendee of the meeting. Can't just be somebody walking past. And now I've got some basic controls: volume up and down, mute, layout, video. Now I can join a meeting with my mobile phone and read chat message and raise my hand and some of the emotion icons you can do, but this is giving me access to the, volume up and down and end the meeting, those types of things if you need to. And we also have the option to cast. So if I'm in a meeting, I've got my mobile phone and we enable it, I can launch something from my mobile phone and send it to the meeting. Should come up in a second. Yeah, Jason's made a question. So this be something like the Neat board. Neat boards, like Neat's equivalent of the Surface Hub. It's actually very, very cool. I think they're less expensive. You can get trolleys for both of them for moving them around, but I can't say I've had a lot of exposure to them. I've only seen sort of some demos of it, but yeah, like Surface Hubs, you can launch things on it and display it. It's part of the meeting. Also, people physically in the room can see it. But this is really handy. I might just have been asked to come into a meeting and I haven't. Oh yeah, I'll just go into here. I'm going to open up my file in OneNote on my mobile phone and cast it straight to the room. It's there. I don't have to, bring my laptop into the meeting for the little bit of time. But I have to be an invited person. You can't just sort of walk past and do something silly. I think this just sort of goes through what the people will see in the meeting. So it does look like that. Reduced screen, but it's pretty cool. How it works, well, it's low energy beacon. It's just using Bluetooth. So it finds an enabled Teams room and it's using a peering service. It's going out to the service and the service sends it down, which is very cool. And that's how we looked at this morning. This is how you can turn it off if you don't want, or you can turn it on and say, I don't like remote control, or I like remote control, but I don't like proximity join. So you get the option to turn that. Notice casting's not, an option there. There's not a separate option for casting. Now, here's one of these features that I absolutely think is fantastic. I want to say that front row is a layout. So you've got all together mode and that type of view for the video, people's faces in a meeting. Front row is that equal ranking of everybody down the bottom. Okay. And there's some cool stuff coming in that incorporates this. For example, there'll be things like agendas. So you can display the agenda of a meeting and it'll actually tell you, hey, you've been given 15 minutes in the meeting and that's getting close to running out. So there has little color codes letting you know that basically your time for your bits up, and then this is the next person we're expecting in the agenda. You can have 5 people on a single monitor. You can increase it to 9 people if you've got dual monitors. You will see everybody's, there's some provisos with this, but everybody's video will be the same size. So, depending on how far away people are from the video, it can adjust that. Backgrounds are gone, whether they're image backgrounds or actual backgrounds. So you'll just see a floating head. If people raise their hand, you'll see the order with which people raise their hand. So the speaker doesn't have to find that information out. They'll know exactly the order that people raise their hand. Chat messages, there's a separate screen on the side, so it's very clear. I don't have to look to another screen to read the chat message. Now it all boils down to the number of monitors and the size of monitors that you have. There's one thing that I'm holding off on before we go. Now this is where I was sort of saying to people, if you like this feature, and the next screen gives you a better example, don't go playing around with the some people go into monitors and change it to 150%. You set all that stuff back to 100%, and swapping screens. When you could say multiple screens, swap it. Here's a fantastic thing. That's what it's going to look like down the track. See how they're just people. The emojis are next to them. Raised hands appear, chat appears, multiple. If I have multiple screens, whoever's speaking gets prominent display, content gets a separate display. The other thing too with the voice recognition, if you've got multiple speakers, if my picture is on the left-hand side of what they're seeing there, my voice will come out on the left-hand side speaker and vice versa. So it's very, very cool. But as you can see, I'll let this keep running. So it's just a small with a single monitor. When we go back to the larger one, you see that new like rooms of the future, they've got that concave desk where we're all facing forward. So what the cameras can do, if you've got the intelligent cameras, they can take a person's face from a meeting room and give it its own separate video feed. I'll see if I can pause this. So see how they're all facing forward? That camera can pick these faces out and give them the people that are remote into the meeting will see these people's faces as a separate video feed. Now, at the moment, it's a single feed, but it splits it. But what they're hoping to come with, and I can't give you a date on that, is it'll actually take those faces and turn it into a individual feed, so it will look like this. So it's some very cool stuff. Now they've got some big LED projectors shining on the wall, which are fantastic. We set up our offices years ago for a different purpose before this stuff was available, and I just sort of think, God, if we had known this, they're not always ideal. From that regard, I'm not sure where the instructor would sit in this type of scenario, but I just think this is fantastic. It feels very, very inclusive. So yesterday, those of you with me part one yesterday, I was saying, don't keep thinking that this is just the conference room, the meeting room at work with the rectangle table. You know, now that we've got people working from home and some in the office, and they might not always be in the office at the same time, we want work to continue. So coming up with these little collaboration areas, now this is a pretty serious solution. They've also got that speaker and microphone, the Sennheiser one, mounted in the sitting. But look at this, you know, fantastic environment, and it's you know, as good as you can get with some people away and some people in. So front row is a video layout. So if I was sitting at home and you're all in the meeting room and it's picked out the face feeds, I'd choose front row. But there are the together mode and the gallery and the large gallery modes. But to have that fancy feature that we're talking about and down the track, you need to have the speakers, the cameras that are capable of that support. And you can turn it off or on if you want to. Very, very cool. Now training, just to wrap this up, there's some URLs in your notes there that you can go to. There's just some end user helps and for people that might be of some good use. So rather than creating your own, you might go to these resources. There's also an introductory video. Yesterday, we looked at when people book a meeting, you can send an acknowledgement email back with some HTML, and you can actually send them off to these or ones that you've created yourself, links so people can watch it before they go into the meeting room, because especially if it starts to get used, you don't want somebody walking in there and needing help for 15 minutes to start the meeting, and now that's just screwing everybody up in the queue wanting to come in that meeting. So that's nice. There's also these that you can download. So once you've downloaded and unzipped it, you'll get posters on the wall, just letting everybody know that it's coming. There's a quick guide in PowerPoint, so you can steal some of these things and rebrand them. It's basically the URL is aka.ms Teams Customer Success Kit. That's the URL. So if you're typing it, if you want to, I've got HTTPS there if you need to. And some signage. So it might not be a bad idea to create your own or print some generic ones off and just sit it next to the device. So if people walks in, it's got some basic, you know, instructions. There's also another one here that you might, this is just how to join a meeting. So anybody that's really finding it hard, we've got some basic instructions. You know, getting people to watch a video first would be ideal. However, a lot of people don't do that. Problems with troubleshooting. Now, occasionally you might have to reset a device if it's not running well. Always contact the vendor, particularly like the Android ones, because they will have a specific image for the device. As I said, with Android, it's per vendor. Windows, they are Internet of Things. There's all maybe an OEM type setting, so you might need support for that. Troubleshooting media for audio. When you go into a call, you can actually see on the device there's poor quality on that date. We looked at this a little bit earlier on, so I can see overall, but I can click on this one and find out specifically what was the problem. So it's just saying here's the date and time when we were experiencing the poor audio quality. And then if we drill into it, you can say, well, the cause of it was poor network. It might not be the device, because this view will tell you what type of device they're using, what type of network they're on, what type of operating system they're on. Okay, so that's a nice guideline. Yeah, you can go into advanced and debug analytics for an individual user. So this is just coming back and saying, well, this was the problems with the network. We were having, latency issues or packet loss issues, and that's affecting. Generally, it tries. If you're with us yesterday, you'll see how the new Saturn protocol splits the audio, video, desktop sharing into different streams, and it tries to make sure the audio is of decent quality, and might play catch up with the video if somebody happens to hit a bit of a glitch. This is another one where it might be saying that, there's the manufacturer information as well. Could be some information about an Android device. Everybody else was fine. Why was it this? So I now can see that it's a bad call or sell or something along those lines. The Teams Room app itself, so if it's not updating for whatever the case may be, you can sign into the device and go to the Windows Store and manually update it yourself. If it does fail, there is a recovery tool that you can get access. I've got a Microsoft Doc article, I think, here. Recovery tool. Have I not got the URL? It's in your notes, but I thought I might have had the URL that I can paste in there for you. I don't, my apologies. But if you go to Microsoft Docs and type Teams recovery tool, there's some walkthrough processes that you can do on that. You basically sign in as an admin tool, go to the Windows Store and updates, and then if that doesn't work, try the recovery tool. Other things you might do is maybe the resource account, it's not restarting, so you can sign in as an administrator and then log into Microsoft Teams, maybe the browser version of it, and see if you can log in with the resource account. And if that works, then it may be something to do with a proxy or DNS settings or a licensing issue for the account. Obvious things like make sure the name and password's been configured properly. If it's never worked, then that's fair enough. If it's suddenly not working, then I'd be suspecting something else. There can be certificates involved if you're hybrid with Skype as well. So the Skype account might not log on. Now the Skype account is the default one. So we use admin, but there's that Skype that account uses for some default things. Maybe somebody's messed with, there's a setting in the group policy, in the registry that might block auto admin logon. So you might need to change that from false to true. Could be an expired password too. A password is blank. Video, so it's blurry. Checking all your cables. Maybe do a firmware update, making sure that you've got the correct one. Generally cable issues, and it could also be that CEC support. We talked about that a little bit yesterday, where the monitor doesn't automatically, TV doesn't start automatically when you launch the meeting. Some devices don't support it, so or there might be a setting in there for turning it off. Just general, typically it's networking issues. So if the video is poor quality, mentioned the proxy yesterday. If you can, make sure it's not using wireless, local internet access, local DNS resolution. Check your firewall. If it's going through firewall ports, make sure there's nothing there blocking that, and other general things. Anything unnecessary, settings from group policy, Intune, software that you might not need running that's getting rolled out. Or you can disable those things. Worst case scenario, be careful with BIOS and firmware on the devices. Yeah, option of multiple cameras. You do get an option to choose the preferred camera, and you can also, if you've got multiple monitors, you can switch screens. Be careful. That fancy multi-purpose meeting rooms of the future with that front row does not like forcing swap displays. It automatically works out software, because it wants to know you're there, your sound comes out on the left, or you're there, it comes on the right. When somebody talks, they'll get prominent here. The content will always be over here. The chat's going to be, so you let it do its thing. But yeah, if you're not using that feature, you can muck around with that. Also, default cameras become really important if you're using that front row type scenario, which is very, very cool. All right, I hope everybody got something out of that today. What I have got for everybody, and normally we do allow time for this, but in a day's format, that is one thing, but we had 7 hours. We had a little bit more time up our sleeve, but we split it up into bite-sized pieces for everybody. But that's your digital badge. Now, I'm not expecting anybody to do it now. I just want to remind everybody it was written for those managed service partners. Microsoft were delivering it to those companies, just letting them know these are the issues businesses had. These are the things you might need to support or help businesses with. So the exam is pretty tough. Have had people pass it first go when we were running it over 7 hours, but a lot of people go, wow, that was a bit tough. You can sit it as many times as you like until you get your badge, and then you can display it on LinkedIn and stuff like that. If you want to, you get a Credly badge, I think is how it works. The only thing that I would ask people do, and I appreciate you, some of you are probably starving and want to go to lunch, but there is a online form that goes to Microsoft. So if you could fill that in, that's really just how did you find the course. Now, I know some of you are probably asked you to do it yesterday. I've got to find out what Microsoft want out of this. Do they want one for the first half day and one for the second day? I think they'll say yes, because some people might just not turn up for the second day or miss the first day. Now, I'm going to stop recording this meeting. That will take a little bit of time.